All right, we're live. I think I might be a little loud here. Let me adjust my volume real quick. I think I might be blowing out the system. We're blowing out the system, you guys. Actually, it's okay. Okay, cool. So I think the audio is okay. I'm Joshua Kemble. I've been an art director for 8 years. I'm a graphic designer and illustrator who's been doing that professionally for over 20 years. And when I'm not working on graphic design or illustration, I'm working on crazy things like graphic novels. Graphic novels like Two Stories, which is my graphic novel that talks openly about my journey in learning how to navigate depression as well as panic disorder, and talks about suicidal ideation. A lot of heavy topics. The whole goal of it being to destigmatize hard conversations about mental illness, because I think that's really important. And it also is really confessional, autobiographical story that tells a lot of interesting childhood stories as well. And it's all hand lettered, hand inked, and can be handed to you online. So make sure you pick up Two Stories. And then we've also got Jacob's Apartment, which is my graphic novel slice of life story about Jacob and Sarah, two roommates that are in their early 20s. Jacob is thrown for a loop when his father is diagnosed with cancer and starts questioning his belief system, and questioning his belief in God and existence, and kind of asking those deep existential questions that kind of tend to hit after you lose someone. And similarly, Sarah is also questioning her identity and some of her choices in life as she's gone through a really recent breakup. And so both of them, as they're kind of struggling to figure out who they're going to be in the future, because they're both in their early 20s trying to get their careers going in the arts. And they're both kind of trying to figure out their identity, what they believe. And they're both plagued by weird dreams that start interweaving with each other in both reality and in sleeping. And so this book kind of is like an exploration of young love, of loss, of grief, and of the search for meaning. And also, it's kind of like Eternal Sunshine for the Spotless Mind and Ghost World in its vibe. So if you're into those two books, then you'd probably be into Jacob's Apartment. You can pick this up at bookstores everywhere. Okay, that's all the stuff I have to promote. It is Saturday night, and so I hope everybody's having a good Saturday night. And I'm going to be working on Not Death But Love, the strange supernatural story of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Today I'm mostly going to be working on layout type stuff. So the first thing I have to do, and I'll go ahead and show you guys. So the first thing I'm doing right now is taking my roughs, and in Adobe Illustrator, I am adding different text balloons and like ruling out all the panel borders and stuff like that. I have my rough right here so that I can refer to it as I continue on the page. And then I have a little bit of layout work to do after that. So that's what I'm planning on doing whilst streaming today. Roll for Tarako said, Joshua, listening as I clean up the living room. Cool. Frank, if you want to hop on too, you're more than welcome. So just let me know whenever you're done cleaning up the living room. And speaking of, I'm going to be drinking an 818 San Fernando Valley IPA. My coworkers got me a little 4-pack of these for my birthday, and I've been enjoying them very much. I'm going to have to kind of visit that microbrewery at some point. Let's have, what is it that Dee calls it? Your daily ASMR. So here it is. Ooh, that was a pretty good one. All right. There we go. Pretty good. And what we're going to do is work on comics. And then I think I want to continue commenting on the meta-ethics discussion that we were listening to the other day. Between Destiny and Cosmic Skeptic. I feel like I was getting into some really good, interesting stuff where one of the hard things about ethical conversations for people without a basis in belief in the supernatural is when you start kind of getting into the weeds of the basis of ethics and whether ethics can be held to a standard or not. Adam's here as well. Adam, you're more than welcome to join if you want to join as well. And we can have just like a Saturday party. But in the meantime, till I hear back, I'm just going to go ahead and continue the commentary on this. And we're going to work on getting the layouts done for this page, which should be pretty fun. So first things first, let's get these panel borders ruled out and this text all placed and stuff like that. Very fun, exciting times, you guys. But I am excited about continuing this meta ethics discussion because, again, like I really feel like it starts getting into much more juicy territory later on. And if you guys are curious, this is on Cosmic Skeptic's channel. And it's Destiny, who's a political streamer and commentator, as well as like video game streamer. But at this point, I think in his career, he's mostly known for being a part of the I think he was one of the founders of the Twitch political debate space. Oh, Adam was saying, can you give a basic summary of the meta ethics thing so far? I don't think I saw any of it last time. So far, from what I understand, Destiny is very much a utilitarian, is what he's described himself as. And so his whole idea of the purpose of life and the perfect, like the way that people derive ethics and morality is that generally people are after their own kind of personal good, and basically are seeking to maximize their own personal happiness. So it's kind of the typical, I mean, I hate to say it, but it's like the human flourishing argument, where it's basically his basis is that from that you can derive a bunch of moral systems that can then grow and kind of become like governmental systems that are kind of forcing people to adhere to what most people think is going to cause like the most general happiness. And so I think his take on it is that, from what I understand, and basically now they're kind of mining into some more difficult questions because it's being brought up as like, well, if it's your happiness and like your reason for being moral, like Cosmic Skeptic kept bringing up this example of if you're on a desert island and say there's like everybody's starving to death and you come across like a batch of cookies and like you have, perfect knowledge and you're able to know that if you eat all of these cookies, no one will be the wiser. So it kind of takes off the table, like, basically being generous and altruistic because of the idea of reciprocation, right? Which is what Destiny's main argument is that you'll have kind of reciprocal altruism where people will look at other people and be like, oh, like I'll share these cookies because if somebody else stumbles upon some food on this desert island we're all starving on, I would like them to do that for me, so I should do that for them. And it's sort of a selfish, it's kind of interesting, but it's very similar to objectivism to me, his argument and his moral stance. So far that's kind of where they're at. But Cosmic Skeptic kind of pushed into it and was like, yeah, but like, what if like you have absolute certainty that no one's going to know that you ate all the cookies? Wouldn't you eat all the cookies? Because by your own framework, like your whole ethical system is based on like your own thriving and happiness. And so it brings up these issues of like, when that's at odds with what we tend to consider ethical, but it's like you'll never get caught. Like, how does that become an unethical thing? And then I think Destiny's actually bit the bullet of admitting that he's a somewhat a relativist when it comes to morality. So he bit the bullet pretty hard on the typical thing that comes up in these discussions, which is if morality is subjective, then in a scenario like World War II, where, hey, let's say the victor who takes over the world and happens to just take out anybody who disagrees with them, so the only people remaining on Earth all agree with your warped, twisted ideology, is that then moral? And Destiny actually bit that bullet in the last conversation, which I'm really surprised by, but actually kind of respect, because that's a hard one to bite. Like, nobody enjoys admitting that, who's a moral relativist. That's usually a big stumbling point. And that question's always like, if you out there are watching this and you're a moral relativist, just prepare for that question, because it's always going to come to maybe not World War II, but it'll be something like, if there's like an evil person with like, horrible, like no interest in human rights, and like, they subjugate their people, and they're like, they create this horrible society that does like terrible things to all their people, and has no problem like murdering or justifying the murder of like entire populations of people. And if that person then goes on to take over the entire world and annihilate anyone who disagrees with them, are they then moral? That's always going to come up if you're talking about moral relativity, which is going to be a unique issue to people claiming subjective morality. So it's an interesting one, but that's kind of where they're at right now. Cosmic Skeptic sounds like he's a bit more of a he's kind of trying to come up with a workaround for so he's similar in his moral stance, but I think his workaround is the idea that like he thinks that evolutionarily we've developed this trait of altruism for the very reasons that that Destiny was describing, but he thinks you can further make the argument that it's so ingrained in us because of the evolutionary process that we start doing altruism without a need for return, because altruism is kind of baked into our DNA. And that's an interesting kind of take, but that's kind of how far it's gone so far. So hopefully that was a decent recap, Adam. I'm sure I didn't recap it fully, but that's kind of where we're at on that. Let's pull up the video and let's watch it and see what's going on. Let's see. Is this good? Yeah, this is pretty good. You can see what's going on my screen. I think we're good to go. So let me know if the audio is okay. Sometimes when I'm doing these commentaries, the audio is not so great. I gotta say, this first stage West Coast IPA from San Fernando Brewery. If you're near San Fernando, I recommend it. It's a pretty good IPA. Okay. Adam said, nice. Thank you. Cool. Okay, so here we go. We're going to watch this, and I'm going to work more on what I'm doing right now in Adobe Illustrator. And there's not much work left to be done in Illustrator. I basically have taken the rough that you see here. I've dimmed it, and then I've put a layer above it. That's where I'm building out the actual like ruled out lines. And then what I'll do once I'm done with this is import this into Photoshop, and then we'll kind of hand draw all the text over it just so that it blends better on the final book. Adam said I can probably join you in a little bit, but currently cooking a meal. We'll be listening along. Awesome. Well, enjoy your meal, dude. And then nice. So Roll for Tarako said DNA, DND, NDA, it's all the same. I don't know. I had to sign an NDA about my DNA that has me. Oh, I was going to make a really good. Let me see. Let me try that again. I had to sign an NDA to not release information about my DNA that has DND flowing through it. How about that? We've tied them all together into one cohesive sentence. It took me way too long to do that. Okay, you guys try in the chats. Tie DNA, DND, and NDA. And then while you're at it, also throw in NWA into one sentence. I want to see that in the chats. That's your challenge. DNA, DND, NDA, and NWA. All four of those, if you can tie those into a coherent sentence in the next, you're on a timer, and we're starting, and we'll check back in 2 minutes to see if anybody can do it. Okay, let's start. Oh, I like that. And DNA from Dan's Stats. All right, let's continue. Our commentary, I think I wrapped up pretty well where they were at, and we'll just kind of see where this goes.
Full conversation, yeah. But yeah, no, like I understand. I definitely know there's a desire to speak of like moral absolutes. Like it feels good. We want to be able to say like slavery is morally absolutely wrong, or
you should be
murdering somebody, killing somebody without provocation is absolutely morally wrong. but I don't, yeah, without having like a belief in actual reducible moral fact, I don't know how you can make those statements with that level of certainty.
Do you believe in the concept of moral progress?
Do
you think the world is better now than it was?
No, I understand.
200 years ago.
Like, I believe in moral progress, I guess, but like it's a subjective thing. Like, I mean, I'm a citizen of the world today, so I believe that, and I like the morals that exist today. So I believe there's probably been like some level of progress. But I don't know, if I would have been a person 1,000 years ago, maybe I would have.
By the way, I really want to highlight the fact that, like, you know, while Destiny's answers here might seem kind of shaky, I actually have to give him a lot of credit, because there's a lot of people who don't know the foundations of their beliefs. And so if they try something like a claim of kind of moral subjectivity, you know, they have difficulty like biting a bullet like Destiny just did in this conversation regarding his own beliefs. I actually give him credit because he's thought through it and he's aware of the problematic nature of some of the things he believes, but he's still owning it because to him that seems like the most true scenario. And I think, to me, like that's very admirable, and I wish more people would do that regarding whatever their belief system. We got Gary just joined us. Gary, we have a challenge going on where we're trying to get people to mix DNA, DND, NDA, and NWA all into one coherent sentence, and they have about a minute left to do it. So you are welcome to join that, as is Vic, who just joined. How's it going, Vic? Okay, we got Frank taking a stab. When I played D&D, boom, there's one. I had my players sign an NDA, boom, not to speak about the NWA songs playing in the background, or their DNA will be spilled in game. Frank, you know what? We were talking about Frank King, I think, on Adam's channel, or maybe it was on Philip's channel, and you were thinking we were talking about you, and then we were talking about, well, you know, no, we're talking about the cartoonist. No, at this point, you are Frank King the second, because that earned kinghood, like right there. Just without pause, he took on the challenge and hit all 4 points. And by the way, I just said 4 points, all 4 of them. Do you see that? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the 5th finger just ignore, because that was me being an idiot. All 4 points, guys. All 4 points right here. All around my 4 fingers. Okay. Let's continue this. Let's continue this and work on comics. I hope you guys are having a good Saturday night. I'd encourage you, if you have your own beverage of choice, to crack one open while we're listening and work on some stuff.
I felt like this was a moral regression, right? Or
in the same way that we can sit here and say, well, you know, there was a time when people sort of hated homosexuals and thought that women should be confined to the home, and how crazy is that? Look at how much progress we've made. You know, in a close possible universe with the opposite trajectory, we could say, or, you know, if things revert in 100, 200 years time, we could be sat here saying, gosh, I mean, you know, just 100 years ago, people thought that women should be in the workplace and that homosexuals should be able to adopt children. How crazy and awful that was. And look how we've progressed. In other words, do you think that we have to, if we have a worldview similar to yours here, just abandon any ability to say that certain states of affairs are better and worse, rather than just saying, like, I prefer it? I mean, there seems to be a meaningful difference between... So,
by the way, I got to give Cosmic Skeptic some really, really heavy credit here. He's asking really important questions. Like important drill down questions to kind of get to Destiny's moral framework. And I think it's really fascinating. And again, I would practice this kind of question answering with your own moral framework. Like, whoever's listening, if you can't answer basic scrutiny regarding your own moral framework, maybe you need to think a little deeper about what you believe. That's my take on it. That's my hot take. You guys, think about what you believe. Know why you believe what you believe. Okay, let's continue.
Me saying...
I think we have a second one that we're going to have to read.
Which, homosexuals aren't persecuted, versus saying something like, I prefer my showers to be scalding hot rather than just warm. You know what I mean? That there seems to be we seem to be talking about a different kind of preference here. But if it is all just essentially whatever's going to sort of make me feel better about myself, there doesn't seem to be much of a difference between those kinds of preferences, right? Is that your view, that the preference that you have, that people not be racist, is similar to the preference that you have of what temperature your shower should be?
Yeah, I think ultimately at the end of the day, I think I would say it's all roughly the same thing. Yeah. And then I would have to say
so again, like I gotta give Destiny credit. There's a lot of bullets that he's biting because he's thought about what he believes, and so he's like, as much as it's uncomfortable, like, yeah, I do believe that, which I think is, again, like, admirable. People owning their beliefs is a pretty good idea. Gary said, on that note, you might appreciate the book. Do you think what you think? You think? Do you think what you think you think? Is this a real book, or are you just trying to get me to say a tongue twister? That sounds pretty amazing. Actually, I would probably dig that book. Okay, let's read Vic. Vic is number 2 in the. Frank easily takes the number 1 for our challenge of mixing those 4 words. All 4 of them. Okay, Vic said, I scream NWA in the office, spitting out my DNA, writing for D&D, and they made me sign an NDA. Nicely done. We got NWA, DNA, D&D, and NDA. Nicely done. Gary said, yes, that's an actual book. I think I'm sold just by the title of the book. That's such a fun title. Okay, so now what we're going to do is open up... let's see here. I'll get the art up there on screen too in 2 or 3 seconds. I just have to actually open up the Photoshop file now. And hopefully that'll work. We'll see. Yeah, Adam was saying that sounds interesting about the book, Gary. That's true. I think it sounds fascinating. Okay, let's continue. You guys, I am so stoked that there are 5 people currently who are interested in listening in on a conversation about meta ethics and working on comics. What a weird niche of people we are, but that's really exciting. So let's continue.
Considering, yeah, I can't technically believe, if somebody would ask me if you believe in moral progress, I'd have to say no, because progress implies some objective movement from or towards something else, which implies there is some like moral goal or whatever. I can only say that like there's been progress insofar as I guess what I would like to see, but ultimately it would all be contextual and subjective. So yeah.
So how do you square that with? I'm not entirely familiar with what sort of you're most interested in right at this moment on a political level, but I imagine there are certain issues that you care deeply about, try to have debates about and make content about with a view to trying to mobilize people into believing something that you believe, and saying probably things like, this is wrong, this is bad, this is good, this is what you should do.
Nice. Vic said, I'm here because you're the only soul that's alive. Oh, the only soul that's live. Got it. Well, hey, you know what? I'm a pretty solid live soul right now. So let's continue.
How do you square that sort of commonsensical language on the surface level when talking about how to behave with the fact that a little bit of digging reveals that what you're essentially talking about is your favorite temperature of shower?
I think that the thing that I try to appeal to is that even if these things are ultimately subjective, and even if I can't ground them out in some like resolute, concrete morality, these preferences are real, they're strong, and they're shared by almost everybody. So when I start to argue with people, even my rhetorical strategies are going to be pretty similar. If I'm arguing trans issues, for instance, with a conservative, I'm not usually going to argue that like, hey, don't you think it'd be good if we allowed, every single type of person in society to have access to the same rights and privileges? Because you're nebulous, negative, positive rights, you're in some weird world. I usually do like a direct appeal to, hey, you're a parent. If your child had a medical problem and you had a conversation with your child and your doctor, would you want the government getting in between you and your doctor in making a good decision for a child, right? So even
That's a really good question to ask a conservative, because they're going to be like, no government, get in my child, no government, gonna fight that government. Okay, anyhow, sorry, that was my little knock against conservatives for a second there. Let's continue.
I try ultimately at the end of the day to appeal to people's like individual preferences and to try to demonstrate, like when I'm trying to tell you, when I'm arguing with somebody and I say, I think what you're doing is wrong, that's the verbiage that comes out. But what I'm really saying, and what we'll get at in the conversation, is, hey, the thing that you're advocating for, I don't think you realize is ultimately contrary to your own self-interests. That's essentially what I end up arguing with people. Yeah.
That's more or less the approach that I've taken as well. You're essentially running a consistency test rather than trying to establish some base moral principles from which you sort of build up to truth.
The thing I think is important to realize, the only reason why that consistency...
So this is an interesting thing, though, because, like, you know, again, I'm sure they're going to get deeper into this, but one of the conundrums with that is, why even argue base moral principles if it's all just kind of a matter of opinion? It's an interesting... You know what I mean? Like, if there's no objective truth to like the statement, like, hey, murder is wrong or something like that, then like, why are we arguing it? You know, like because at the end of the day, it's just a matter of opinion. And at that point, it's just about who has the biggest army, which, you know, some people might be comfortable with believing that. But for me, I think that that begs a lot of questions. Let's see here. Oh, nice. Vika is joining in saying, the government ain't gonna work with my guns. They ain't gonna turf my guns. Government, no. Anyhow, sorry. I live in the Antelope Valley, and sometimes just the Antelope Valley comes out of me, where it's like I'll just be sitting down, just having, you know, drinking an IPA, just kind of chilling, enjoying my day, and then I'll be like, that government can't take my gun, that government. It just happens. Sorry, guys. Okay, let's continue.
Test works is because we have some shared... I hate that I lean into this so much, but some shared like moral intuition, right? Which is a phrase that I hated 3 years ago, because I was like, we're gonna find the ultimate moral law. But now I lean strongly on these moral intuitions. But this system breaks if you run into the occasional, you know, fucking psychopath, right? If you start running into somebody who's like,
ooh, okay, so this is really important. Like, so him talking about this is a huge thing too, because again, if morals are subjective, it's all about kind of pursuing our own personal happiness and stuff like that. I think I brought this up on the last stream, but it's like inevitably, Vic was saying, to anyone who's offended, why though? Yeah. But anyhow, on the last stream, I think I brought this up, where it's like, once you abandon the idea of, like, when you kind of embrace a scenario where it's like all about personal happiness and personal fulfillment, and people, you know, feeling their own like thriving exponentially on their own, and like pursuing whatever makes them happy, you do have the issue, and I'm glad Destiny's kind of like bringing this up and possibly owning this as well, of the irrational actor. So this is a problem I always have whenever I talk to, again, I'm not like a debate bro or anything like that, but I do have some times where I've talked to like hardcore libertarians, and one of the biggest things they have problems answering is like, yes, the system's beautiful, but what happens if like a guy is just like set on, you know, breaking your house and just taking your stuff? Like, how do you stop that? It's like, well, we'll have like a, you know, a nice little meeting, and like we'll make sure we come up with like a just system that everybody agrees on, but we're not going to force anything on anyone. And it's like, yeah, but like, what if that guy gets a lot of pleasure out of just like screwing people over? You know what I mean? And then it's like, well, yeah, but we're not going to like force like anything. And it's like, well, but what happens when you have to exert force? Like what happens when you need force outside of yourself to establish the baseline of law? And a lot of libertarian stuff kind of collapses once you kind of introduce an irrational actor. It's kind of a similar thing to this philosophy, where one of the problems is like, you know, yeah, that's all well and good if you're like, hey, let's all pursue our own happiness, but you could justify all sorts of terrible things by being like, but it makes me happy, you know, like, and so I'm glad they're kind of moving on to this. Let's see here. Vic said, that sounds close to objectivists in the pursuit of personal fulfillment when the reasons of within reason of those objective truths. Yeah, it's very similar to objectivism. It's utilitarianism, so it can be like both better and worse than objectivism. I think it holds up like philosophically. I mean, there's a lot of bullets you have to bite with that philosophy, but I think it's a little more coherent than objectivism, but it's very similar. And then Adam was saying, Destiny sounds consistent about the consequences of his starting point, but he does not sound convinced of what he is saying. Yeah, and that's the hard part. But I will say, at least he's being consistent. And again, that's more I can say for him than quite a lot of people. Thomas said, I think of myself both as a libertarian, but I see it as more of an ideal to strive for. I think as long as you're kind of viewing it as like maybe it's not the end goal, but it's like it's a painted picture of like a society that could work, is cool. But I think like the idea of just ignoring the kind of imperfections of the world, and then introducing a governmental system can be really dangerous. Like a good example of this, I brought this up to friends of mine, where if I had just been like, if there was no history of like communism being applied in countries, when like, you know, if you read like Lenin, it is really compelling if you're in a society that's never tried to implement what he talked about. Like, you know what I mean? But the problem is we have this long history of like proof of concept, like where it's like, okay, this is what it looks like in reality. And again, it doesn't look as pretty as the material, the reading material would make you think it would look, right? So it's like, it's one of those scenarios where in practice it gets a little more complicated because, again, we're not in an ideal world. And in an ideal world, like pretty much almost any system would work perfectly. In a world where nobody wants to steal, like everybody respects each other, everybody's cool, everybody's rational. Like, at that point, you don't need government. You don't need anything. You could literally apply almost any system and it would work. But the problem is, like, that's just not the world we live in, nor will it be for, like, you know. So, it's an interesting thing, but I don't mind the idea of that being an ideal. I think it's just when people want to practically apply it today and just, you know, plug their ears when it comes to, like, irrational actors or, like, problems with counterfeit or problems with theft, property protection, that kind of stuff. Okay, let's continue.
Well, yes. I don't care if somebody tries to kill me. I actually would want to live in a world where we all fight to the death. And it's like, okay, well, you're insane and there is no arguing with you. I can't appeal to your preferences because your preferences are so out of line with, 99% of humanity. But that's essentially my rhetorical, and I guess like,
in which case, might makes right. When you come up with a genuine value conflict, it's just whoever's got the bigger guns wins out. And and that's kind of how it. I don't want to say should be because that's to import moral language, but it's not how it shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. I think that's a good thing because ideally, in the if I say like the conservation of angular momentum, does that mean anything to you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, like when galaxies are forming, they have an average spin to them. And what happens is after millions and hundreds of millions of years, all the particles that aren't spinning in a certain way collide, and you get this thing that's like moving in kind of one consistent direction. Your angular momentum is on average some direction
some direction. I think he knows which direction. You guys know which direction he's talking about. You can say it in the chats, but if you guys are familiar with my streams, you know exactly where I'm driving here.
A spinning cloud of stuff. I feel like for humans, that same concept has to apply. That if you had 100 civilizations and 50 of them were kind of like what I'm saying, where it's like, listen, we're all going to work together. We're going to be self-interested. We're going to do things. And then you've got like 50 that are like crazy. Some are like, we're going to kill people that we don't like, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, those types of thoughts get weeded out. And then you're just left with people that are like, okay, well, we might disagree, but it's in my best interest to respect your rights so that you respect my rights, and et cetera, et cetera. Like, I think it's okay to not be tolerant of people that are so morally out of line with you that they would be incompatible, like a free and open society, basically.
Okay, guys. So I thought about it long and hard and did some research, and I realized that like ad blockers actually do kind of rob the creator of a little bit of revenue, and so I'm not going to use ad blockers on this. Okay, let's continue. Oh, I love my chat. They know. They know. Yes. Gary, when in regards to the direction they were discussing, said it's a new one, definitely. I agree. And then Adam was saying counterclockwise. Close, but I think it was a new version of that was what was the question we were begging for. Roll for Tarako said angular momentum means everything to me. Nice. And then Adam said interesting mystery of the universe. Virtually all galaxies orbit and rotate counterclockwise. Nice. There's also a really amazing, and now I'm blanking out on the full name of it, but Jim Lujan did a counterclockwise animation, and now I'm forgetting. It's counterclockwise in the I can't remember, but Jim can kill me later for forgetting that. But anyway, you guys should check out Jim's work with counterclockwise. The hip hop artist is pretty good. Okay, let's continue. Oh, did we mute it? I muted it. Hold on.
Agree with you. You're therefore justified in sort of asserting your might and imprisoning or potentially killing them just because they like a different flavor of ice cream.
Nice. Thank you, Gary. You helped me. Counterclockwise in Foreverland. Thank you. Yeah, it's really good. It's good animation. It's on Amazon. So you can check that out on Amazon. And from what I hear it's fairly popular on Amazon, you know. Speaking of, like, one of the other things I'm kind of curious if they're going to get into is this is one of the biggest issues with utilitarianism that I've found personally. Where does that leave, like, the lesser of, like, the least of these, like people who are, like, you know, mentally disabled, crippled, old, like people who have no utility to offer? And I'm kind of curious if they're going to kind of get into that, or they're just going to kind of dance around it. I don't know. But that to me would be a really big one that I would want to, like, if I was grilling somebody on a utilitarian framework, that's something I would want to bring up. Now, they'd probably, you know, make the argument that, like, well, I'd want to be good because when I'm older, or if I have, like, a, you know, a scenario where it's like I'd want to pay it forward so that in hopes that somebody would do the same for me. And again, that's an interesting reciprocal theory, but it kind of it can collapse if it's like one of those, well, you're only reciprocal if people notice. Because, like, if nobody knows, then, like, why shouldn't you, you know, be selfish? It's an interesting conundrum, and I'm curious where they'll go with it.
Dream to you.
Well, hold on. No, when I say we disagree, what I'm talking about is I'm talking about disagreements on fundamental moral preferences, right? So say you've got 4 religious groups and 3 religious groups are like, we believe.
Sorry, I got to highlight what Vic said because I agree with him. He said, listen, if people don't like mint chocolate chip, I do feel homicidal. I kind of understand that. I might possibly fight a war over mint chocolate chip ice cream because, I mean, seriously, if anybody doesn't like mint chocolate chip ice cream, what is wrong with you? Seriously, like, if there is an objective truth out there, it would be mint chocolate ice cream being, like, one of the best, if not the best ice cream. That's just an objective truth. So you can have your subjective opinion on it all you want, but mint chocolate ice cream, on the ice cream, the canon of ice cream, I think that you know, all people pretty much agree mint chip is the best.
Believe in our God. We think that it's wrong to believe in other gods. But if you worship another god, that's between you and whatever.
Oh, and by the way, if you guys are curious to see it, Frank, our wonderful moderator of the channel, left a link to Amazon in the chats right now, so you can check out Counterclockwise in Foreverland in blah 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 bland. Okay, let's continue.
That's for you to figure out. Let's say there's a 4th religious group that says our God is the only God, and we're going to kill you if you don't believe that. That 4th religious group would have a deeply fundamentally incompatible view of the world as the other 3. And I think it would be okay for the other 3 to be like, well, listen, we can all coexist in harmony with each other, even if we have disagreements, and you can't, so you have to go. So the fundamental disagreements I'm talking about are ones related to, like, basically huge infringements of rights of other people, killing people, raping people, stealing from people, stuff like that. Yeah.
But it
saying
would
that
be
mint
just
chip
as okay
isn't
for
the
that
best ice
4th
cream.
religious group to try to eliminate the other 3.
Yes.
Which are you sort of troubled by that implication of your worldview? That if you have this world religion that just says, you know what, no other God but God, and we're going to kill anybody who disagrees, and they just start going ahead and doing that, the only recourse you have is not to say you shouldn't do that, is not to appeal to any kind of moral principle, but just to say, I hope that we've got a better military, and that's the end of it.
Yes.
You guys, fireworks are going off in the chats. Thomas said, as an ice cream expert, I disagree. Shocking. And then Vic said, you've gone too far, Thomas. You've gone too far. I love it. Frank is also dropping some links to people in the chats and their YouTube channels. You guys should be subscribed to them.
So, I mean, on a couple levels. So one, yeah, I fully believe that two sides of a conflict could be fully justified in destroying each other. This comes up interestingly sometimes in some self-defense things where, let's say two people are having
Okay, this is going to be an interesting ethical dilemma where, I'm curious where it's going to go, but I'm guessing that he's going to be lining up a standard ethical dilemma of if two people can be in conflict and both be justified. And usually it's a pretty interesting ethical dilemma. I'm curious how I'll line it up.
A conflict and somebody enters a bar and they're trying to figure out, what's going on. And somebody says, oh, John over there is trying to kill everybody, help. And John isn't trying to kill everybody. And so a guy that walks in who heard there was a violent conflict, sees John trying to kill or gets reported to that, he might try to stop John from doing it. John might try to defend himself. And arguably both people have good justification for their actions, which is unsatisfying because you want to say there's one right and one wrong.
Yeah, they had misinformation.
But I think that's the reality of the world. When we say, and then when you use the term like, do you want to appeal to some moral right or wrong? I just don't care too much because I don't know if it matters, right? Like I could be the most morally justified, correct person in the world, but if the other guy has the means and capability to destroy me, that those moral statements mean nothing. And my moral thought will disappear with me as soon as they basically overrun me,
Yeah, you said that sometimes both sides in a conflict are justified in essentially wiping each other out. Isn't in situations of basic value conflict that always the case? It's always the case that both sides are equally justified in just completely, when it comes to it, wiping each other out just because they have what is a fundamental disagreement. But when I said, which flavor ice cream, what I mean to say is that it's of the same nature. It might be sort of more fundamental on the sort of hierarchy of their beliefs, but it's got just as much import as saying which flavor of ice cream you prefer. You just have this preference. Somebody else has a different preference.
Yeah, but it would be the difference of the imposition of that value on other people, right? So if you've got a society where you're saying we can only eat vanilla ice cream, then, maybe people have to die for that.
Okay, guys, this is a good point. Like, if you have a society that says that mint chip isn't the best ice cream, maybe that should lead to war, Just saying. Okay.
But if you've got a society where you say, I wish we would eat vanilla ice cream, but people are free to eat other flavors of ice cream, right? It's how much do you impose your values on other people is where you run into these fundamental value conflicts, right?
When you buy music gear from Sweetwater, you get more than just...
By the way, I back an advertisement for Sweetwater. That's my favorite music shop. They're amazing. They'll, again, like, they're not a sponsor of the show or anything, but since, like, an ad popped up, I'll just say they're a great place to buy a guitar. And, like, every time I've ordered a guitar from them, they take the time to intonate the guitar before they send it. So they do, like, a once-over and stuff. It's easily the best if you have to order an instrument online. If you can order it from Sweetwater, I recommend that without being sponsored or anything like that. If they were to sponsor me, I would take that sponsorship, and I would hope that sponsorship would be in free guitars. Oh,
we're going to kill you.
Yeah.
Another group says, well, I don't know if I'm too happy about that. So they get killed. And what's the problem?
It depends. When you say problem, there is no problem. The people that kill the people obviously accomplish their end, so it's good for them. Now the people that got killed, it's bad for them. But I don't see what the value is in any part of this of appealing to some moral principle. It reminds me of like the comic of like there's like a guy that's standing at the gates of heaven, and it's a biker, and he's holding onto his bike, and God's like, well, what happened? And the biker's like, I had the right of way. I don't know. It's like, doesn't really matter if you have the right of way if the guy ran you over, I don't see any of the value in appealing to moral principles when it comes to like conflict.
So what's weird is he's biting a lot of bullets, but like it's things I would be uncomfortable kind of accepting for myself. Like I feel like and again, this could be just feeling and sappy emotion or something, but it's like, I feel like it's hard to argue with the fact that, like, whether powerful or less powerful, there are right and wrong ideas and there are right and wrong morals. You know, it's kind of a tough one, to just kind of bite the bullet of like, whoever's got the biggest army kind of dictates the morality. Again, even if that's the case, you know, do we lose the ability to kind of view history through a lens of like, hey, this giant group of people, like in Sparta, when they were, you know, like there's some things they got right, and then that whole like throwing babies off cliffs like wasn't necessarily the most amazing thing they were doing. You know, I don't know. Do we lose the ability to even look back and judge because, you know, well, I mean, that was the society at the time, that was acceptable at the time, so we just kind of go, I guess, you know, they were the most mighty at the time, so they were okay. I don't know. It's an interesting conundrum, you know.
Yeah.
Do you see a danger that this kind of line of thought could lead to some form of social Darwinism?
100%.
Very, very popularly after the theory of evolution became accepted science, or I should say by natural selection.
Mm-hmm.
People like to point out that some people take this to say, well, look, we're just animals. We just have different values. We just conflict with each other. Sometimes people are stronger than others, you know, and that's just the way it is. You know, if we decide that we're going to sort of embark on a eugenics campaign to remove disability, and we're going to start by killing everybody who's disabled right now because we believe that, you know, human beings are supposed to be the most sort of evolutionarily proficient versions of themselves, that's what we're going to do. This line of thought seems to not just sort of lead to that, but justify that line of thought.
Yeah, that's one of the dangers.
Yeah, but if you're fighting back against a group of people that believed that, like, what would you need something more than to just say this is morally wrong, I think, right? And I think even the advertisements, I think intuitively most people would even agree, even if they wouldn't say so, because the advertisements wouldn't just say like, this is wrong, stop. It would probably be showing videos of mentally disabled people with families next to them, of them doing jobs in society. It would be an attempt to appeal, whether you like it or not, to your kind of these like fundamental preferences, right? Like, look, first of all, they look like humans and you are a human, right? You know, even animals we like because they have human-like features sometimes.
But one of the tough parts about this is he makes a good point that, hey, if you're trying to reason with somebody with this viewpoint, you're going to have to make like propaganda or things like that appeal to like people's humanity, right? Or like shows like a utility of the people that are being oppressed or whatever. That's a fair point. But the one thing he's not addressing, and I'm curious if you'll get held to this, is he's kind of pivoting from the point, which is, why would you even make a video like that, right? If everything's just kind of utilitarian and based on like whatever utility people can add, you know, arguably, you know, shouldn't you just kind of agree with that activity? It's an interesting conundrum. Vic says, that sounds very 1930s German-ish. Yes, there's a lot of problems that come up with utilitarianism that will inevitably have Germany brought up, because a lot of actually during the very start of it, the idea of like moral subjectivity was like super popular in Germany, like during the rise of Hitler. So yeah, so like inevitably, if you meet somebody who's utilitarian, like you're gonna hear arguments from that era, just because there, you know, historically were some kind of interesting movements that happened with lack of objective morality. Once you kind of throw that out the window, like you can end up in some really weird societal moves. As much as that's like, you know, a faux pas or whatever online to kind of bring up World War II, if you're speaking to somebody who's a utilitarian or an objectivist, honestly, discussions of World War II will inevitably come up.
Times, and we anthropomorphize them, and you know, you see mentally retarded people. That doesn't mean that they're worthless. It doesn't mean that they don't have value to family and friends. It doesn't mean they can't function in society. Like ultimately, I think the campaign to argue against the eugenicsers would end up being like an appeal to their preferences,
what if they can't
rather than just saying like this is right or this is wrong.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, that relies on the idea that there's some that basically most of the time when we have what seems to be a moral disagreement, there's actually a lower resolution of thought in which we have a shared moral intuition. Use the word moral intuition.
Yeah. I would agree exactly that a lot of the disagreements we have, so I would almost argue that there is no such thing as moral disagreement among humans, except for the case of like mental illness, that a lot of the moral disagreements we have end up being like these second or third order thoughts that are more socially influenced. So
okay, is he going to call him on that cop out? Because if you're saying, hey, like we never have moral disagreements except for mental illness, it's like, wait. But so does that mean anybody who disagrees with you morally has mental illness? Like, I hope he holds him to that, because that's a really interesting kind of slippery way out of a hard question where it's like, generally everybody agrees with me except the mentally ill. And, and then it's like, well, wait, but like who's mentally ill? Well, anyone who disagrees with me. Like, it's a problem. Yeah, hopefully he gets called on that. We'll see. I think Cosmic Skeptic's savvy enough to
for instance, like how we feel about like LGBT people, right?
Hey, Mac users. Have you noticed your MacBook's getting a little slower to respond, or your fans are getting noisier?
Let's continue.
Yeah, that it's not like a basic value conflict if one person is pro-LGBT and one person is not. There's going to be something more fundamental.
Yeah, they both of them fundamentally want like what's best for society and want what's best for their family. They just think about it a little bit differently, right? Yeah.
Or even like, freedom for human beings when you might have like a religious conception of freedom that means freedom from sin or something. But you ultimately want freedom for human beings, and the value is agreed upon.
Yeah.
But I wonder if there's a circularity lurking in the way that you just said.
Nice.
I think that, everybody shares these moral intuitions most fundamentally, except in the cases of mental illness. Would you be defining cases of mental illness there by their disagreement with the moral principles? I mean, some people might say, for example, everybody agrees that it's wrong to sort of torture babies for fun. And then we say, well, some people disagree with that, but they're mentally ill. And we say, well, what mental illness do they have? Well, they're psychopaths. But the reason that we say they're psychopaths is because they don't share our intuition that torturing babies.
Nice, Gary. Have a good one. Gary said, okay, this is interesting, but I am not being called, or I am being called away. Probably will finish tomorrow night. Nice. Have a good night, Gary. Frank said, for non-comic streams, check out Roll for Combat. No relation to Roll for Tarako. Interesting. Yeah, I'll agree with Vic. I gotta say, you're dropping truth bombs. It's mentally ill not to like mint chocolate chip. I agree with you, Vic. That is a problem. And we got, yeah. All right, let's continue.
Babies for fun is wrong, if you see what I'm saying. So you can't just say something like, well, everybody agrees except for people who are mentally ill. If you're just defining people who don't agree as mentally ill people, you've got the same problem that some people don't agree.
Well, but I mean, you could, right? I think you could make that statement. No, like you.
But what
arguably,
grounds do you have to say that they're mentally ill?
Well, because they. Well, I guess it wouldn't be mentally ill. Maybe you would just redefine this form of mental illness as like, I guess like morally incompatible or something with like current society.
Sure.
The reason why I say mentally ill. The reason why I say mentally ill is because I feel like fundamentally most humans have this shared agreement on things, and then in order to diverge from this at a fundamental level, you're essentially, it sounds bad to say, but you're like almost like not human in the way that you view things. Like if you were to extrapolate some like types of self-destructive or societally destructive behaviors at a fundamental level to everybody else, like humanity would essentially collapse. If you had a bunch of people that were like, I want to kill myself, I want to kill everybody around me, I want to rape everybody around me, or like society would necessarily like devolve into absurdity and disappear pretty quick, I think. Yeah.
So they're mentally ill because they're in a minority in terms of their preferences?
Maybe. Well, I'm not defining all mental illness this way. The only reason why
that was a good lead by Cosmic Skeptic, because there would be a lot of tough stuff you'd have to answer if you were saying like anyone in a minority and viewpoint is mentally ill. Well, I mean, now you got like you're gonna have to bite a lot of bullets if you said yes to that. So it was good to him to kind of hone down on that, just to see like, wait a minute, so anyone in a minority is mentally ill? It's like, it's a good thing to clarify that that's not what he meant, because that is a way you could have led with it. Let's see here. Thomas said, I don't like chocolate and peanut butter together too. Thomas, I really respect you, man, but I don't know if I'm morally compatible with that statement. Because chocolate and peanut butter is amazing together. They're like best friends. Let's see. Frank said, now that Gary is gone, what's with Mars bots? Good point. The
reason why I'm making that carve out for mental illness is because people that are mentally ill can have psychotic breaks.
Frank saying permission to ban Thomas. Wouldn't that be horrible? It's like, you guys, we're drawing clear battle lines on this vlog, on this live stream, where you either like. Oh wow! See, it's my Antelope Valley coming through. You're gonna like that chocolate chip and peanut butter. Okay, let's continue.
From reality, so they're not even interpreting reality on some fundamental level, or they can have like really fundamental parts of their mind that are like manipulative or just not good for society. So like, say somebody that is a psychopath or somebody with extreme narcissism, people that plug into society in a very exploitative way, essentially.
Yeah, but without recourse to objective ethics, what you essentially say is that their brains are different. For example, if we took every single narcissist in the world and we said, well, narcissism is a form of mental disorder, because, you know, most...
What's up, hon? Okay, my wife has chimed in on the peanut butter and chocolate conversation now. She said if you don't like peanut butter in general, like if you're not a fan of peanut butter, let's even give you a pass on this. If you're allergic to peanuts, then it would make a lot of sense to be like, yeah, I don't like peanut butter and chocolate. Like, that makes a lot of sense. But if you like peanut butter, and then you're saying you don't like peanut butter and chocolate, then my wife is calling into question your sanity. So that was my wife's contribution to this discussion.
Human brains work in a particular way, but these people are particularly exploitative and lack empathy, so they've got this mental disorder.
Yep.
And we put them all in a bomb shelter, and then we nuke the rest of the world, and the only people who are living is me and you, Stephen, and all of these narcissists. Guess what? Suddenly we're the ones who are mentally ill because we're in a minority. That seems like a bad way to justify our conception of what makes a person mentally sound or
I love it. This is a really interesting discussion. We're at the hour mark. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break and watch a trailer. If you guys are watching this and enjoying the content, I just ask one thing before I hit that trailer. Hit the like button. Honestly, I've had some really cool growth lately on my channel. A lot of people have been subscribing. And I think it's because people have been more proactively hitting like. So it's because of you guys taking the 2 seconds to hit that like button that it's helping the growth of this channel and helping our community grow. So I ask that you do that. You out there, hit that like button, and then we will play. We're going to go ahead and play a trailer. Let's play the standard Jacob's Apartment trailer.
Clearly it seems that only in dreams can we be these things we've seen and walk around breathing pain. I don't know the part to play in this heart of mine. There's dissonant things, they split at the seams.
right. Thomas was saying not allergic, like peanut butter well enough. I just have to say that when I told my wife Thomas said he likes peanut butter, there was a visible look of shock and dismay. Just saying. Thomas does make a good point. He said his wife likes that he doesn't like Reese's because it's more for her. Yeah, my wife kind of can see. I think I think you're starting to convince the crowd here. We've got Frank saying, I had Reese's animal crackers the other day. Not bad, but not enough animal cookies. Interesting. Frank was saying, I need to make a Jacob's apartment trailer for Josh. Yes, you do, Frank Salazar. You do. Frank Salazar of Salazar Art Nation and Tarako Creative Cast, which you guys should all be subscribed to, as well as Roll for Tarako, which is, you can watch Frank's descent into the evil world of the horrible evil world of Dungeons and Dragons, where his soul will be captured. Does that sound good for like an evil voice? You can watch him going from like a reasonable, great guy, fun-loving guy. By the end of it, his eyes will be glowing red, and he's going to be like, I am rolling for my soul. Let's see here. Vic said, Frank, do your duties to your fellow man and ban him. No, let's not ban Thomas. Thomas is great. Okay. So, oh yeah, and also Salazar Nation for his vlogs. That is Frank Salazar, ladies and gentlemen. I'm curious to check out Roll for Combat. I will say, role-playing is super fun. It was very demonized in the 80s by the whole Satanic Panic move. And I'm glad that that no longer exists. Welcome to the clutches of evil, Frank. I don't know. I'm enjoying the demon voice. It's kind of fun. Welcome to Joshua Kemble. Wait. That's Kremble. That's how Kremble will talk from now on. So Joshua Kemble just talks like this. And then when it's Kremble, it's like, welcome to the Kremlin Art Palace. I will steal your souls. Also, I just want to throw this out there before we get back to our commentary and working on art. Just a funny little side story about today. My sister-in-law is hilarious and amazing and super into like horror movies. And today, like about like an hour or so ago, I like sit down on the couch and I look over and she's watching a movie called Llamageddon. And it's like, it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. The beginning, it got kind of lame later on, and we both changed it. But it was like, the premise was like, it starts with like this really bad like animation of like a llama like getting in like a horse trailer, and like the trailer like flies off into outer space and like hits the International Space Station. And then the llama's eyes are like glowing red. And then it cuts to like live action shots of like a llama like getting out of the horse trailer with its eyes glowing red. And it was like Llamageddon. And I was like, I'm kind of glad that exists. I'm glad that exists. Anyhow, so I guess that's on. What was that on? Like Prime or?
May, huh? Where did you find that Llamageddon show?
Yeah.
Video?
Okay, it was on Amazon Prime. So if you guys are curious, I will say the first 15 minutes are pretty amazing, and then the rest so far, like after that, it didn't really keep our interest. But yeah, she pointed out that you'd have to be pretty tipsy to kind of enjoy that movie past the first 15 minutes. But the first 15 minutes, I will say, Llamageddon, pretty impressive. Okay, enough about Llamageddon and just the sheer objective truth that mint chip and peanut butter and chocolate are both excellent things. Let's continue.
Mentally ill. We're essentially saying that whatever the majority is
yeah.
wellness.
I mean, is it bad? Have you ever read the book or heard of the book I Am Legend?
I've heard of it.
Oh, that's essentially the plot of that book. There's a guy that goes around hunting vampires all day. And then eventually they trick him, they infiltrate his stuff. And then he realizes at the end of the book, when they're like bringing him to call for kind of his crimes, he's in front of it like a civilization of these like night dwelling people. And then he realizes like, oh, well, you know, to them, to me, they're all monsters, but I guess to them, I am the monster. And it's him coming to that realization at the end. Yeah, I mean, what you're saying, a lot of the objections that I hear from you.
Sorry, I wish Destiny had just brought up Frankenstein's monster and the meme about that, where it's like the new ending of Frankenstein, where he like turns around and he's like, you can call me Frankenstein if you want to. That's okay. That was it. It's just explaining that it's okay to call Frankenstein's monster Frankenstein, just to make up for like years of book and literary types being like, technically he's not named Frankenstein, he's actually Frankenstein's monster, and Frankenstein's the doctor. Okay, let's continue.
And I agree with all of these.
Doing a lot of
is that sometimes a lot of the things that I'm saying are emotionally unsatisfying. Like, I think we want to have a righteous conviction to say, that's wrong, don't do that. And I feel that emotionally. And I mean, even I want that emotionally. But one, I don't see how logically I can ever deduce that. And two, I don't see how it even really matters that much. Because like you said, say we eliminate this society and it's just you, me, and then like 20 of the most intolerant people we know. You know, if they come for us with axes and we're like, well, hold on, stop. Like, look at this 42-point syllogism I have to show you why you're actually morally incorrect. Like, they'd be like, okay, well, I don't care. And then they would just kill you. And it's like, oh, well, I guess my moral authority here didn't matter much, you know?
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, to be clear,
Okay, so we've got Frank saying, have you played Basic Fantasy? I just bought the 3rd edition. I'll be showing my books on it soon. Yes, Frank! Show it soon! Sorry, that's my role-playing voice. We've got Thomas saying, I've read the PDF. I want to try Shadow Dark. Should be getting the book soon. Already have the PDF. Nice. Adam said, Satanic Panic in the Attic. Great of Montreal album. Ooh, of Montreal, deep cut. Nice.
In this particular conversation, it's because you said, you were making essentially a descriptive claim that most people share their basic fundamental values. But you said that there's an exception. And again, no moral element here, but you just said that there is an exception for people who are mentally ill. And I'm saying... I guess I'm saying let's be careful not to be circular in saying that we're just going to call anybody who disagrees mentally ill so that we can say, well, everybody agrees.
I'm glad he's holding
those
into
who are
that.
mentally ill. That would be a bit like me sort of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Although I will say, you know, anyone who doesn't like mint chip ice cream is mentally ill. I just want to throw that out there as just an objective truth. Just drop that. Drop that bomb. Yeah. Okay.
Some mentally ill people I disagree with, but not everybody I disagree with would be mentally ill. They're probably going to be very mentally sound people that you still have like very fundamental disagreements with, right? Like in cases of like nationalistic or religious conflict, these people might not be mentally at all, but like second order facts have caused them to take a position against you, and the only resolution is through some military conflict or something, right? Yeah.
Although arguably this takes us back to where we started in saying that even the sort of the nationalists and the globalists and the religious zealot and the atheist, like they still ultimately are motivated by something like, you know, maximization of their own well-being or positive experience or something like this. In which case we could say that there's some basic moral intuition that most people share. And the reason I wanted to ask you about that was because so much of what we think about the world is based essentially on unprovable intuition. Yeah. For example, the existence of the external world, the existence of other minds.
This is really interesting. It's going to get into stuff. Okay, so meta-ethics are really fascinating. They can also verge on... I can see why people don't like talking about meta-ethics too much, because it can kind of eventually... If you talk meta-ethics enough to people, then you're talking about just the nature of reality itself, whether we can trust our own intuitions. Why can we believe that tomorrow is going to be the same as today? How do we know we're not just a brain in a vat? These like kind of heavier discussions. And again, it's a good thing to practice, but I think they're going to get into that other stuff. So We'll see. We'll see. Vic said, what about cannibals? They're in the minority, but when they have their individual society view of eating people. Thomas was saying, it sounds like Destiny is using a Western lens to view the world. My dad traveled a lot in the military, and other cultures have way different views than us. I agree. It's a weird thing because I do agree with the idea that, like, just there are a few facts of the matter. Like, for instance, most cultures think that it's not okay to just randomly kill someone. Most. Not all, but most. If they didn't think that, those cultures would die out and be replaced by cultures that had rules about, like, not killing people. So I kind of get that. Like, there are a few kind of moral threads that do tie throughout most societies. But I agree with you too, Thomas. Like, it gets really problematic when you start talking about, like, very huge moral differences that, again, aren't something everybody can kind of just hold hands about, you know? And again, like, you know, I am impressed, like, again, listening to Destiny, because, again, he's biting bullets about his own viewpoint that I think you kind of have to if you're going to hold the viewpoint that he holds. But again, I've said this at the top, like, I don't necessarily agree with his viewpoint on things. I tend to not view everything from, like, a utilitarian framework. I think it has the same pitfalls as pure objectivism. Vic said, meta ethics are more like my brain can't process this. All right.
Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with the problem of induction, for example?
The problem of induction is great.
We have no reason to say that the laws of physics are not going to stop working in 5 seconds.
Yeah, the sun's not necessarily going to come up tomorrow or whatever, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And this is the reason it's called the problem of induction is because it's essentially unsolvable. It might be solvable with theism. That's kind of another discussion, but it's not a solvable problem. But we say we can recognize I have absolutely no way to justify objectively to somebody who disagrees with me that the external world exists, or that the sun will rise tomorrow, or that other minds exist, any of this stuff. But we still believe it, right? I presume you still believe these things.
Yeah.
And so if you're willing to allow unprovable intuitions in the case of general epistemology to allow you to say, well, I think it's objectively true that
I hate to say this, cosmic skeptic is starting to sound like a theist here. I'm just saying, if he goes where he's going, it's starting to sound a bit like theism.
The Earth orbits the sun, even though that's based on sort of observations that rest on unprovable intuitions. It's just an intuition that the external world exists and that your sense state is accurate. But you're just going to say, yeah, but I'm just going to trust it and say that because using that intuition, I see that the Earth orbits the sun. I'm going to say it's objectively true that the Earth orbits the sun.
Interesting.
Why can't we just do the same thing for ethics in saying that, yeah, we have this unprovable intuition that sort of my well-being is good for me, or like maximization of positive experience is a good thing. And through that unprovable intuition, I see that murder is wrong. And so I'm just going to say that murder is objectively wrong. It's as wrong. It's as true to say that murder is wrong as it is to say that the Earth orbits the sun. If you're going to dismiss one because there's no way to sort of resolve the fundamental conflict to someone who disagrees with you, that's true of like all epistemology.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe you can solve this one for me, because do you know who perspective philosophy is?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay. I think he's tried to get me on this argument before, and we have trouble getting much farther, either because my mind's not equipped or because I'm just so correct and I don't realize it. Okay. So maybe you can help me sort this out. So first, let me summarize your argument so you can tell me if I understand this correctly. So I'm saying, well, ultimately, there is no such thing as moral fact. We can't prove that moral fact, so it's silly to pretend like you can make objectively true moral statements. And then you'll say, okay, sure, that might be the case. However, if we look at things like the problem of induction, or if we look at even the manifestation of other minds in the world, you can't prove that any of that exists. However, you don't go through life being like an epistemic agnostic or anti-realist, or you don't go through life assuming that tomorrow the planet's going to explode. Like you go through life assuming these things are objectively true. So why would you grant one for like metaphysics or epistemology, but you wouldn't do the same for ethics? Is that essentially kind of the question? Right?
And to be clear, it's not just I think it's a little bit stronger. It's not just that you don't go around like acting, as if these things aren't true. You sort of act as if the external world exists. You act as if other minds are true. That's true, but I think it's stronger that you believe that it's true that other minds exist as well.
You know what's funny is it sounds like cosmic skeptics almost like making a really solid argument for like faith being a very solid basis for belief. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but that's where it seems. Adam said cosmic skeptic could have worded the problem of induction better. We do have very good reasons for believing the laws of physics, even if it is based on induction from the countless empirical observations. Yes, true. But he's making a point that, like, how do you even trust your empirical observations? That's the biggest problem of induction. Again, like, why should we trust anything that we're seeing? It's an interesting argument. But we can't we can't absolutely know with 100% objectivity, or can't say we know. Yeah, that's true. Because again, we could just be a brain in a vat,
Well, right. It's not just that you act as if that's the case. You believe that I'm a real person talking to you right now, right? And that is based upon, let's say, if I were to run this argument, you might say that is based on as justifiable an intuition as any moral intuition that you could think of.
Okay. So we'll see if you can get me over this hurdle. So my big issue when it comes to things like these, there's a lot of stuff we'll argue about, and then it'll boil down to this one point. I feel like it's resolving disagreements between people that point me in a direction of something that I'm more comfortable standing on solid ground on. So, so for instance, when it comes to like existence of external universe or something, I can talk to a lot of other people and we can have agreements and disagreements on these things. But ultimately it seems like if there are 4 people standing in a circle and 3 people are saying, I think that the earth is round, and another guy saying, I think the earth is flat, we can run a battery of tests. We can take in all the sense data, and eventually our minds can come to some agreement because of our ability to interact with the external world and say, well, look, actually,
so Adam, you'll be happy he's bringing up
the world is
data.
Spherical, and the 4th guy, you were just wrong. You can think what you want, but you're wrong. However, if 4 people were to stand in a circle and 3 were to say murder is wrong, and the other guy say, well, I think murder is okay, it feels like there's no possible thing that you could appeal to or look at or ever have a discussion about to resolve that disagreement. I don't know how you would do it. Yeah,
I think that doesn't work.
Okay, tell me why.
I think because in the situation that people disagree.
Well, this is getting interesting. I really appreciate when people can, like, in a civil way have a conversation where they're kind of poking holes or asking questions about somebody's belief systems without somebody getting aggravated and like storming off. The only exception to that is if somebody is literally trying to make the argument that mint chip ice cream is not the best ice cream. I'm sorry, I might get mad and storm off. That is insanity. Insane claim, sir. And you will need to back that up with heavy sense data to disprove the objective fact that mint chip ice cream is the best. Let's see. Vic said, I am a brain in a bone robot with a meat slapped on it. Thank you very much. Interesting. Adam said, point being, we have very good reasons to believe. It doesn't mean we can know for certain it's true. But the question is, like, what is certainty in a world where nothing is certain? So, like, we have the word certain in the dictionary for a reason, right? And I'm guessing that in a scientific sense, certainty never equates to 100%. There is no 100% in science. There's always like 98%, That's kind of scientifically certain things are never fully certain. They're never 100%. But can you induce from sense data and life experience and history and reason and the fact that the universe seems to follow this logical framework where there's consistent laws? Can we deduce from that some things that we can have certainty in, as certain as you can. And I think that in a weird way, cosmic skeptics going like a step further and saying like, hey, if you can be certain in that because of your sense data and these other external factories, my goodness, we're not talking about manufacturing here. But yeah, he's basically making the argument like, hey, if you can kind of be that certain about everything else that you can't be 100% certain on, couldn't we then import morality to that? Where it's like, hey, I'm like 98% certain of this, isn't that enough certainty? I don't know. It's interesting.
Agree about something like the shape of the Earth or that the Earth exists, let's say. This might be based upon some fundamental conflict. Let's say that I said to you, like, I don't believe that the moon exists, right? And you sort of said, but look, I mean, can't you see it? Like, can't you, like, haven't you heard, haven't you seen like the photographs? Can't you see it at night? And I say, well, actually, yes, I can, but you're not getting me. What I'm saying is I have a more fundamental skepticism that my sense data is accurate. I think we're living in a simulation or something like that. Now,
Okay.
If we disagree that the moon exists, there is no test you can run to disprove that, so long as that's what my belief is based upon. Because you could say, well, look, let's get a telescope. Let's look in the telescope. And I'll look in the telescope and I'll be like, yeah, I see the same thing as you. There it is. There's the moon. There's the Sea of Tranquility. But I still don't believe it's there because more fundamentally, I don't think my sense data is accurate. I don't think there's an external world, right? In the same way, if you have moral disagreements, let's say you're pro-gay marriage and someone else is anti-gay marriage, and you say, right, no, we can sort this out because look at this study that shows that when people a society that accepts gay marriage is on the whole happier than one that doesn't. And look at the fact that when people aren't allowed to get married, they fall into depression, the suicide rate goes up. You could look at all these sort of studies and statistics and things, but that doesn't get you any closer to solving the problem. Because of course the fundamental value conflict is one that is insensitive to empirical inquiry. In the case of the basic epistemic intuitions that make up things like belief in the external world or other minds, they're of the same quality. If you've got 4 people in a room and they all agree that sense data is accurate, but one thinks the Earth is flat, then yes, based on that fundamental agreement that sense data is accurate, you could draw a consistency test. But if those 4 people in the room, if one of them doesn't believe that the external world exists at all and believes that they're just a brain in a vat, there is no test you can run. You said there's a battery of tests you can run. There's not one test you could run. Yeah,
okay. So this is like one of the issues is like, I've definitely experienced this with, if you get in like a discussion with somebody about the scientific results of something, and you're like, hey, look, it's proven, it's like healthy for people, it's like this prevents disease, this is all sorts of stuff. You can go through all these lists of like empirical data, and when you talk to the person, you realize like they don't trust any empirical data. And in that case, like when you're talking to somebody who doesn't even believe in the sense data, then like how can you even begin to have a discussion? It's the problem of nihilism, like full nihilism. This is kind of brought up in most philosophy classes at the very get-go, where it's talking about basic epistemics. And if somebody doesn't even have a root epistemically in believing reality is observable or measurable, or that rationality and logic can work, then you have literally negated the ability to even have a discussion. So, in general, it's like, you kind of can't even start with that because there's no starting point. You need a basis of like agreeing on some kind of common framework or common objective measure of reality. If you don't have agreement on that, then you can't even begin to have a discussion about ethics or moral differences because you literally can't even use data to prove your point or rationality or logic. I've had that conversation with people before where I remember a long time ago, I was talking to somebody and they said, this was really interesting, but they were saying, I think that logic and rationality are a construct of the patriarchy. So I don't believe things need to be rational or logical. Like, I don't think we need to reason through things in order to make a case. And I remember talking to that person and being like, well, at this point, talking is kind of silly because we're communicating and like we can't even agree on the rules of communication. It's like at that point, what do? There's not really much you can do. So it's an interesting conundrum, that one. Thomas says exactly the example of Ohm's law only works over a certain regime. Let's see here. Vic said the only time I take looks at stuff like this is Josh's streams. Nice. Well, I'm glad to
to disprove that.
Expand your brain, sir.
Okay. Let me just write this down so I'm keeping track of these. So here, okay. So
pausing, I still think it's really important if you have a moral framework or you have like a philosophy to go through a rigorous conversation like this with somebody at some point. Because I think that can sharpen your beliefs. It can also like make you more aware of where your epistemics or your moral systems are kind of like falling apart. And it can help you like really refine what you believe. It doesn't necessarily have to change your mind, but I do think every once in a while having a really heavy conversation like this about your kind of framework that which you're basing your whole life, like I think is a really valuable thing, especially when it comes to like moral things, because again, it's good to be able to justify your morality or your moral preferences on a scale that's a little bit bigger than, well, because I think so, or because I feel that way. Because again, like you are going to have to convince other people of those kind of things if you want the world to kind of move in a specific direction. So yeah, anyhow, it's not a bad practice.
Here are a couple issues. So I think we both agree that that if somebody believes in something super crazy that can be resolved with sense data, at some point the person will just be wrong and we can safely discard their opinions about the earth being flat or round, unless we get at a very, very, very fundamental level about like brain in a vat, correct?
Wait, guys. Do you remember when I was on the arc of watching flat earthers debate people? I'm forgetting what they called it. It was, yeah. They don't use the word sphere in atmosphere. That to me was one of the funniest things I learned this entire year, was that they'd literally be like, look, guys, when you're drawing, you need to work on your atmos, okay? You need to make better atmos in your illustration. And it's like, wait, you can't say sphere? Yeah, you can't say sphere. That was my, probably like among maybe the top 3 things I learned all year, was that they call things atmos because you can't use, whatever you do, don't say sphere.
That level so the guy's saying, well, actually, I don't think the moon is real. You're like, well, look at all these tests. And the guy's like, well, of course you think that. The Matrix is telling you to think that. Like at that point, So here is a level where, okay, I'm going to pull out the 2 most disgusting words ever, okay? Have you ever heard of, I'm sure you've heard of the phrase like ultimate skepticism, right?
Oh, yeah. I was half concerned it was going to be the N-word or something then, but...
no. It's even worse in philosophy than the N-word, okay? Because as soon as somebody's pulled this trap card out, the whole conversation is meaningless. I would say that at a very, 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 very fundamental level, that I would say that I am ultimately skeptical. So the strength or the conviction of my statements is only going to be up to a certain point. So if I say, for instance, and this is kind of similar to the context we ran into earlier, where it's like, that's a good or that's a bad thing. And you're like, well, you don't really believe that. It's like, well, I guess that's true. When I say good or bad, I mean with respect to the subjective moral system that I have, blah, blah, blah. If we were to say something like the earth is flat or there are other minds that exist, I would say that like all of these statements are also contextually qualified within the realm of, these are the things that I can know to be true, but I'm only going to go like to a certain level of depth with that statement. So if somebody says, well, I'm a brain in a vat, what I would say is, oh, okay, I guess you could be, and I could be too, but whatever brain in the vat you are disagrees with whatever brain in the vat me and everybody else is, so that's irrelevant. Like, I would never get to an argument that's like so fundamental that we have to debate whether or not we like actually exist, because that would be a thing where I don't know if I can actually justify that or prove that. I would act as though I do, much the same that I act as though there are things that are right or wrong, but I think ultimately that's going to rest on like some subjective axiom that I can't.
Thomas said, skeptic man. Vic also said, I thought he was going to say a slur when I hear the most disgusting word.
Like fully, truly prove, unless you've got something for me.
that's no problem.
Okay.
But well, I mean, there might be problems in that, like, if ultimately you actually, like, in fact, did not believe that the external world existed. That's not to say you believe it doesn't, but to say you were actually indifferent, or you really had no reason to know whether induction was true.
Yeah.
If you actually believe that, it probably would have an effect on the way that you behave. But putting that aside, I see what you're saying. But why is it that we're treating these cases differently? Right? Because you would still use, if somebody said, like, do you think that propositions have truth value? Do you think it's possible for a statement like the Earth orbits the sun to be true or false? You'd probably say yes, and you'd probably say, actually, I think it is true. And you wouldn't feel the need to sort of issue a throat clearing that said, well, actually, I'm kind of an anti-realist about facts. You would just sort of say, okay, technically, yeah, we could be like massive skeptics about this whole thing, but nobody really is. Everybody agrees that this is the case, and so it's objectively true that the Earth orbits the sun. Why can't we just treat morality the same? I'm happy for you to say, like, yeah, sure, if we dug down deep enough and started questioning our basic moral intuitions, there's no way for me to prove that, but I'm never going to get into a conversation that goes that deep. And in you know, the reality of my life, I'm just happy to say, yeah, it's objectively true.
It's such a reach, though, because again, one has like a lot more sense data to kind of back it. So it's like, I don't envy the position they're in. It's a hard thing to justify morality or ethics when you get rid of any sort of supernatural element. It really is. Like, that's honestly one of the biggest discussions to have.
True that murder is wrong, because it's based on the same kind of intuitions that allow us to escape ultimate skepticism in other contexts as well.
Yeah, I guess I feel like the issue is that ultimately there's zero sense data for morality.
Oh, nice. Vic said, no, the sun orbits the USA. That's right. In my country, the sun gonna orbit all of it. It's my hardcore right-winger voice today, guys.
Like, when we talk about, like... I
noticed that it's, like, translated from... Like, my kind of weird, like, southern voice is translated from being, like, a kind of right-leaning, you know, take my government, don't take my guns kind of thing, to like suddenly becoming kind of like Sling Blade, where I'm just like, I reckon, okay.
Like propositional state, even like prop logic, or even when we talk about math, right? Like, I can arguably, I think, or you can tell me if I'm wrong, like I can actually use sense data a little bit for math. Like, if I take a mathematical truth, like 1 + 1 = 2, I can actually have 1 and 1 things and then put them
that
together and
collapses
see
with
2.
math, though.
But I feel like there's no sense data anywhere to resolve any sort of moral disagreement. I'm going back to that. Yeah, you can tell me for this.
Okay.
Yeah.
First thing I would say is that I think there would probably be some mathematical truths that are insensitive to sense data. For example,
negatives.
-1
Boom.
is -2. I don't think there's really... I mean, there might be a way you can sort of map that onto your senses. But
I mean, I feel like
when
when
observe,
because of how tautologically like math is built, I think that like most of it, because if we talk about like -1 + -1 = 2, like I can have, if I have a foundation to understand what 2 is, I can have a foundation to understand what -1 is, because it's taking 1 less, and then I can imagine negatives as being the flip side. Like at the end of the day, like there's going to be some sort of like, I can map that on. What is what's like the argument against mathematical anti-realist? It's like math has an uncanny ability to line up with reality or something like that. Like I could generate these things, yeah. But I understand that like -1 and -1, but you can argue it's a little bit harder. But when I say something like murder is wrong, like your mind is blank. There's nothing that you can think. Like, what does wrongness even look like? You know?
But I think what you're doing is you're assuming that the only kind of evidence, the only kind of, let's say, experiential evidence that could count in favor of something is something like scientific empirical data. That is the things that you can see and hear, not things that you can feel.
Okay, Cosmic Skeptic again at this point is really verging on like a theistic kind of argument here, which is interesting. Yeah. I think this is one of the reasons I'm glad like STEM has turned into STEAM. I'm really glad they've included arts in those programs, because the problem if you like get rid of the arts or you get rid of the humanities in like a holistic view of the world is you get rid of ideas of like beauty, truth, like things that are hard to kind of pin down and undergird everything. Like, so that's why like these ethical conversations like meta ethics and stuff like that get really interesting, because the more you kind of dig into it, the more you realize like Science is all based on a faith system of faith in the idea that we can observe and record reality, right? If you don't believe that, like, science kind of falls apart. Like, if you believe that you can't trust what we've learned, you can't trust what's observed, you can't trust anything, then you can't conduct science, right? In order to conduct science, you kind of have to step forward in faith on this idea of like, well, truth is not only something you can find, but it's also something that we can observe and record, and we can trust our observations. It's things like that that like really, again, like, you know, people who kind of disregard the humanities, like arts, philosophy, English literature, history, like these things are really important, because like if you get rid of those and you try to kind of import from science, like if you try to take science and have it suddenly conduct the humanities, it fails pretty epically. Yeah, because it doesn't have the tools to kind of handle things like ethical discussions
just as strongly and intuitively as you, like, in the same way that like when you look at something, it just sort of strikes your eye. You don't sort of choose to see the screen that you're looking at right now. It just sort of appears in your brain. In the same way, like, if you have a moral intuition about something, you don't sort of choose to feel that.
Frank said, science blinded me. Wait, she blinded you with science? Okay, let's continue.
Strikes you. And there's I guess technically, I guess it strikes a part of the brain. People would poetically describe it as, you know, striking the soul, and in the way that the screen strikes the eye. But ultimately, what both are doing are just making a bit of your brain sort of go zing, and you believe something. In the one case, you know, through your eyes, you know, you see a computer screen, but what's actually causing the experience is something prods your brain that makes you go, oh, I believe that the screen's there. In the same way, you see a homeless man getting trodden on the street, and something in your brain just goes, I believe that that's wrong.
Yeah, so I guess my question would have to be that, like, or here's a question that I would ask. It feels like if I give you 4 stimuli or stimuluses, multiple stimulus, stimuli.
You guys are giving me multiple stimuluses in the chats. Okay, so we've got. I know I was joking because Destiny mispronounced it. My wife was like, stimuli. I'm like, I know, it was a joke. Okay. Adam Lore said, okay. Vic was saying the Kappa issue 2, page 4, version 2, I'm doing looks much better. That's awesome. Anytime you can level up your art is a good time. Adam said, nice, Vic. Thomas Adams said, you should check out Beauty of Light by Ben Bova. He makes the argument that beauty is a characteristic of the universe because humans evolved to detect it, so it must be there. Interesting. Things that make you go zing was Frank Salazar's statement. Yeah, that was a weird statement where it's like, yeah, all it does is just make your brain go zing. And it's like, yeah, but like, how does that work?
Okay. 4 stimuli, okay? If I give you 4 things to look at, one thing is a blue circle. Mm-hmm. Another thing is a planet orbiting another planet. And another thing is a car. And then another thing is one person hitting somebody else. If I ask you to explain all 4 things, the first 3 feel like they're fundamentally in a different category than the 4th one. If I'm starting to get to statements like, this is somebody is hurting somebody or somebody's doing something wrong.
Yeah, one's ethics.
Like the descriptions of the descriptive things of reality, like a blue circle. It looks blue in my eye and it's got this shape, or a tree looks like this, or a car ontologically has, 4 wheels, blah, 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 versus like, this is a thing that's going on. And
Frank was saying one thing is a blue-haired skeptic. Okay, so here's another reason I really like Destiny. So anybody familiar with the right will know that, there's been this whole movement of like, oh, those blue-haired whatever, and it'd be like a criticism of people on the left that are like blue-haired and stuff like that. And so Destiny had to raise money for a charity, and he made a deal with his followers where he was like, hey, if we raise this much, I'll dye my hair blue. The bit being that now when he debates people who are like anti-blue-haired lefties, they're literally going to be debating somebody who's a blue-haired lefty. And I actually kind of, again, props to that, like credit to that. I think that's hilarious. So he's kind of doing it to lean into the bias of people on the right who've been like, they're all these blue-haired liberals. He's like just kind of showing up to debates with like some pretty prominent figures on the right where he'll just be like, yeah, I'm blue-haired. What do you got? What you got? But anyhow, I got to give credit to that.
It's wrong. Like, to even be able to say that, there's already like a lot of things that are already being processed, you know, in a person's mind. Like, for instance, if they're wearing a certain outfit, it might actually be wrong. It's like a sexual fetish now, you know, and that's the relationship between the things is like, there's so much more processing there than like what would be like a blue circle or a planet orbiting something, or 1 and 1 equals 2, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, to be clear, it's a different kind of intuition. It would be, I mean, what you're raising, there's a philosopher called J.L. Mackie who famously raised what he called the queerness objection, that if moral properties were to exist in the universe, they'd be so, he uses the word queer, so sort of unimaginably different from everything else we interact with in the universe, that I wouldn't even know how to make sense of it. And people in response tend to sort of say, well, yeah, but that's kind of what ethics is. It is this sui generis, you know, totally unique thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, there might be some skepticism in saying, well, if it's this totally unique thing, then how can we even really know anything about it? How can we interact with it? But as long as you say that most people share a basic moral intuition, you're just granting the fact that people do interact with it. They do have that experiential phenomena of feeling the moral quality.
Sure, but
so that's interesting. Like, he's pointing out like kind of a conundrum in his belief system where it's like he's on one hand saying like, hey, morals are just kind of this thing, and on the other also saying morals are something we feel and experience as real, and then saying like, well, you can't really qualify morals. Like, you can't look at like a moral quandary in the same way that you look at like something that's the color blue and you go like, oh, this is blue, you know. It's a little harder to kind of look at something like an ethical question and go, oh, well, it's very clearly, you know, this moral solution. But at the same time, like, him granting the fact that people have inherent shared moral ideas is like also granting the fact that those shared moral ideas must have a basis or something of truth to them. So that's interesting.
But I don't think I technically need descriptively. I don't have to describe that moral quality as anything different than what you said earlier, the shower thing, right? Like, people will avoid stepping into a cold shower because it makes them feel bad. People will avoid socializing with people that hurt others because it makes them feel bad. Like, arguably, descriptively, I think I can generally generate all of these statements without even needing to invoke ethics or morality. I could just do it with the preference thing, right? Yeah.
Okay, so try this then. Let's say I want to say that sort of morality is objective, and I say that's because, or even like preferences can be objective, and I say that's because, you know, when I step into a shower and it's too hot, it hurts. And you say, well, who cares if it hurts? And I say, well, if something hurts, that's bad for me. And you say, well, can't you just, you know, that could be false, right? Like, and I just say, I just can't imagine what it means for something to hurt me without thinking that it's bad. It's just intuitively the case that imagining something harming me is me imagining something bad at the same time. And you say, well, that's just an intuition. And I'm like, yeah, but my brain just sort of does it. I can't help it. And then I say, okay, so we both see a guitar sat behind you, a Fender Stratocaster, I'm imagining. And I say, you know, I think that exists. And you say, I don't think it exists. Or let's say it's the other way around. You say that guitar exists. I say it doesn't exist. And you say, but I can see it. It's right there. And I said, okay, yeah, it does exist, but it also doesn't exist. It exists and doesn't exist. So we're both right. Would you be okay with that? Would you just grant that it doesn't exist? Because I'm saying, yeah, I don't disagree with you. It does exist. It just also doesn't exist.
No, I would probably fight you on that.
He's bringing up a really good point, because that's kind of the claim that Destiny's making here, is that it both exists and doesn't exist, which is like, is not an acceptable. That's just not acceptable. Like, nobody's going to accept that, where it's like, hey, that guitar behind you does exist and doesn't exist. It's really good conversation, honestly. Let's see here. Adam said, I'm way more confident about morality than trusting in something that appears blue is in that same way objectively blue. I agree with you. I actually think moral convictions go a lot further than like the conviction of like color. For instance, like I think it takes a lot more to change somebody's moral position than it does to change their perception of color. Like, sometimes it could just be a matter of like adding a red filter to your view and suddenly colors change. Adam said, if you think cold showers are necessarily a bad thing, speak to Kevin Cross. Oh, I forgot about the whole Kevin was on that cold shower kick for a while where he was like, yeah, you wake up, that'll be the hardest thing you deal with. Everything's easy after that. Frank said, I'm crossed with Kevin. Nice play on Kevin Cross. All right, let's continue.
Why is that?
Because I can go and touch it and interact with it, and insofar as anything I've ever thought of as existing.
Of course you can, because it does exist. Of course you can do that thing. It just also doesn't exist at the same time.
Wait, how? Like on some like very, very, very fundamental level, like if you were to say like we're in the Matrix and it doesn't exist, on that level I could say okay, that could be true, but I'm agnostic.
No, I mean it literally exists and doesn't exist at the same time.
He's making the same argument.
It's both true and false at the same time that it doesn't exist.
Wait, how? Or no? Or tell me what you mean by that.
Right. So notice how your brain just goes, no, that can't be. It's a law. It's what would be described as a law of logic, right? The law of non-contradiction. We just accept these axiological laws like the law of the excluded middle. Something must be true or false. It can't be both. It can't be neither. Propositions, I mean to say.
Law of identity.
The law of non-contradiction. Law of identity. What I've just done there is I've just sort of...
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the point where I have finished this portion of my duties. I have finished the panel borders and the type, and now I'm going to potentially work on some layout stuff for a little bit. But what I'm going to do in the meantime is put on a trailer, and then we'll probably continue this video commentary. Hopefully this is interesting to you guys. I think meta ethics are interesting. I'm not going to get into meta ethical conversations with people quite a lot because of kind of some of the issues that have been brought up where you can kind of end up in this brain in a vat scenario where it's like, can we really trust our perceptions anyway? Are we just looking at shadows on a wall or whatever it is? And then it almost like deconstructs existence to the point where there's absolutely no purpose in having the conversation. That's not something I'm interested in, but I think meta ethics are a really good practice to kind of test your ethical framework. Let's see here. Okay. In the Metatrix, a Lamborghini exists, but also doesn't. Nice. All right, guys. With that as the last word, we're going to play a trailer, and I'll be right back. We'll play Wordzoid by Jim Lujan.
Well, Peter, since I'm such a big music fan, I'm going to have to go with Karen Carpenter. Oh, Stu, I'm sorry. That's the incorrect answer. Trish, what you got for us?
I'm going to go with Kim Gordon.
All right, let's check that answer. Kim Gordon. Do we have a Kim Gordon? Yes, and that means you're our new Wordzoid champion, Trish. Dale, tell Trish what she's won. Trish, you've won a copy of 2 stories, a memoir of faith and mental illness. Handwritten, hand-drawn, and handed to you by artist and writer Joshua Kemble. But wait, that's not all. You've also won a copy of Jacob's Apartment, the story of a doomed romance. What happens when you take Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and put it in a blender with Ghost World? You get Jacob's Apartment, written and illustrated by Joshua Kemble. Trish, thank you for playing Wordzoid.
All right, great job, Trish.
I was told I was going to get a lifetime supply of paper towels.
All right. We got Frank, I believe, taking off, saying he's going to be back and catch it later, as well as Vic. All right. Well, thanks for hanging in there. Make sure you hit like before you head out. All right. So I'm going to work a little bit on some layout stuff off screen, and then we'll probably go for another maybe like 30 minutes and then call it a night on the stream. If anyone wants to join in, let me know too. All right, let's continue the commentary on this weird discussion.
Sort of said to you like, well, sure, I agree with you that the guitar exists, but it also doesn't exist. And you say, well, I can't believe that because of this principle that I have.
Hold on a second. Let me adjust this a little bit so it'll be better for you guys viewing, because we're not going to be showing screens. So you probably want to see this a little bigger, I'd imagine. I almost feel like could we switch it? Could we switch it up? Let's just do this. I'll work over here. Okay, and let's continue. All right, I think that works. I'm going to say save, update layout. Okay, so it's a little bit bigger so you guys can kind of see what I'm commenting on while I'm working on stuff off screen. And we'll continue. Frank said, I hit like 4 times. Nice. With Frank, too, that could be very valuable. I think Frank has like 5 accounts or something.
Have the law of non-contradiction. When I say why not? Like, why can't that be the case? Your brain just sort of goes...
Sure, I would say there are certain logical properties. That were literally granted a priori in our brains.
But all that essentially is just this really strong intuition. You can't really explain it. You can't like justify it. You just say, look, dude, like, are you telling me you don't feel that? Like, of course, like, just pay attention to your brain. Like, of course it can't be true and false at the same time. I feel like that's something like what's going on with like some kind of base moral intuitions. Maybe not quite as strongly.
Yeah,
but there is an analogy that can be drawn here, right?
I think I would really fight on this. I think I would totally disagree with that. I would argue that I think the 3 I hear... Oh God, who is there?
So I want to kind of tack in here. There is like an old idea with theology, is that like the idea of like sort of like a God existence kind of theory, or a theory of supernatural belief or something, being like a basis to kind of build a solid foundation from. I just also realized this is a little bit too big. I can't fit my head that far. Okay, we'll do this. So it is one of those things of like, it is kind of hard to justify something without a solid moral foundation. And this ends up being kind of like one of those examples of that. However, again, like credit to consistency on this part, because at least they're open to kind of explaining. Now, don't get me wrong. Like if you posit like a God or a theory like that, it's going to basically bring up a ton more ethical questions. Like one of the go-tos is going to be like, so because God says something is moral, that sets like a foundation for morality, then, let's say I'm like a culture that has a different God, that has different morals. Who's to say like which one is right? And that kind of conundrum like comes up. So, and again, I'm not going to follow those threads entirely, but I'm just saying it's not like that's an entire solution to the problem of ethics. But I think negating any sort of idea of like a moral ought is a really dangerous scenario where you can lead to, again, just like a might makes right kind of world. But I'm surprised and both actually impressed with the fact that at least they're owning that that's kind of like just the inherent result of their beliefs. So, okay, let's continue.
It's a book I read, Bernard somebody, I don't even remember. But like when you talk about like non-contradiction, excluded middle, law of identity, these are things where there is no room for disagreement on. Nobody can disagree with them. Like arguably your mind is not even human at that point. It's almost unfathomable to think that somebody could disagree on them. For some of these like a priori truths that I think that are granted to our brains by virtue of being human. I would argue that those types of, I don't even know if I would call them intuitions. Maybe that's what we call them, intuitions. I would say that these are far stronger, far different than moral ones, which are, is as crazy as it is, like we can bend some of them, right? Like there might be in horrible situations, there might be some people that think that rape is okay, or that murder is okay, or that stealing is okay, but you'll never be able to convince somebody out of identity or convince somebody of contradiction. Like that's just like unfathomable. So I would argue that these types of intuitions are different, but good.
in the same way, you wouldn't be able to convince somebody that their suffering isn't a bad experience for them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I think I can describe all of what you just said with preferences. I don't need to invoke morality, right? Like it is like the way that the shower hurts you when you get in, like that sensation of pain. You might also get like a sensation of pain when you witness a certain thing that makes you feel a certain way. But I don't think
I guess I was using the word bad there in a moral sense. Like somebody sort of has a feeling that pain is bad for them. It's something that sort of it makes the world a way that it.
I gotta say, Cosmic Skeptic has this falling apart a little bit in the sense that there are definitely people who can convince themselves that like certain pain is not bad for them. Like so that actually can actually be problematic. Just the way he's kind of presenting that is a little too black and white for the world we live in, where you have people because of their belief systems who like literally light themselves on fire. And convince themselves that that's a good thing. So I don't know if that's actually as solid as he's kind of presenting it. Adam said, if somebody thinks that what they are doing is right, but really it's wrong, that demonstrates nothing. That means they were wrong about what they thought was morally right. I can kind of agree with you on that.
Should not be. That there's a way that the world.
But that relies on the assumption of a moral right,
I guess it's just a question of like, are those technically moral statements or not, or is it like a moral ought? Like I ought to get out of the shower because it's too hot for me.
Okay, it's good he's highlighting oughts.
Or like moral descriptivism generally. But I guess what I'm trying to do here is show that even if I grant you that these intuitions are a lot stronger, and there are some senses in which some people can deny certain tenets of what are generally accepted as logical laws, like the law of the excluded middle, a proposition has to be true or false. It can't be both. It can't be neither. People often ask, like, take the proposition that the King of France has brown hair. Like, is that true or false? And people say, well, it's kind of neither, right? Because there is no referent for the King of France, because there is no King of France. And so you want to say it's false, but it doesn't seem quite right to say that it's false that the King of France has brown hair. There seems to be a sense in which that kind of breaks down. Also, there are some people who might want to say that there are certain contexts in which you might want to speak of things being true and false at the same time. You might fall into the trap of saying like, oh, it can be true and false at the same time that it's raining, because it's raining in one place but not in another. But the proposition would have to be it's raining at this particular place and it's also not raining at the same time. There are interpretations of logic that say that these aren't actually sort of as hard and fast as people tend to think. Now, what we might say is that, yeah.
So Amanda tells us your family has cable internet. I was raised on cable.
Don't you want to raise your kids on?
Yeah, sure, there are people who just sort of deny that logical laws are the case. And I've met skeptics who, when you push somebody's epistemological nihilism to its core, and you say, well, how do you even know that the laws of logic are the case? They sort of say, well, in fairness, I guess I can't know that.
Yeah, so like that's the problem with epistemological nihilism is a really hard position to have a conversation with, because again, if you're not even agreeing on the terms of discussion and rationality, then like what is the purpose of having a rational conversation at that point? Adam was saying if there are at least some moral statements that are objectively true, humans making an error does not negate that truth. That's true. That is very true. Adam said, glad that he qualified his statement. It should be at the same time, in the same sense, etc. Agreed.
I guess in theory, I actually can't prove the laws of logic. Fine. We just sort of say, look, I mean, there are people who do that, but that's such a sort of wacky minority view. Like, can we just sort of agree that this really strong intuition is a good reason to base our epistemology on it? Same thing could be true of ethics. Maybe not quite as strongly.
Can it?
But you might say that there are some basic moral intuitions that, some people sort of doubt or disagree with, but there's such a minority, such a wacky position that, we can at least build our moral epistemology upon those intuitions.
I guess we could, but like at some point, I'm probably going to agree with you, but then I feel like, I guess I would argue that I feel like your position has weakened to become mine. So like, if you were to say, well, hold on, we have very strong intuitions relating to our three like fundamental laws of logic. And I'll go, okay, sure. Like, can we have like really strong fundamental intuitions about like what's morally right or wrong? at some point I'll say like, you know, in the same way that we prefer things to not be contradictory or to have an identity or to either be true or false, yeah, we can probably have really strong preferences over like what's right or wrong. But I don't know if that gets us any closer to saying that like morality or moral fact exists, right?
Okay, so here's the thing. I got to give Destiny credit here. Cosmic Skeptic is trying to kind of have his cake and eat it too. And Destiny is just kind of calling him out for that. Like, where he's basically saying, like, you're essentially agreeing with me because you're just kind of saying, like, well, your gut intuition is this, and isn't that enough? And Destiny is kind of pointing out that at least he's kind of biting the bullet on his harder position that he's been kind of holding, and that in a weird way, like, Cosmic Skeptic's position is sort of eroding into the same position. It's just that Cosmic Skeptic's kind of not biting some of the bullets that Destiny's been biting in these conversations. It's really interesting. I will say, you know, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like Destiny's a little more consistent about what he believes, even though, you know, I would say I heavily disagree with his conclusions. At least he's being consistent for sure. Adam said, are you going to be on much longer? It took me longer than expected to cook and eat. I'm probably going to be on for another, maybe, let's see here. I'm probably going to be on for like maybe another like 10 or 15 minutes. Not super long. So I'm kind of feeling like maybe I'll be wrapping in about 10 or 15 minutes. And by rapping, I mean freestyle rapping, which, you know, you guys don't want to miss, so stay tuned.
Or that like ethics are some real thing. I feel like it's just basically become another way of rephrasing that, like, yeah, we all have like certain preferences in life. Like we might have a really strong inclination towards identity or non-contradiction, much the same that we probably have a really strong inclination towards things like murder or torture, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the moral fact is there.
Yeah, I think getting
what it might mean is that we can say something like,
is really
if there is such thing as truth, or I should say accessible truth, because really this is an epistemological problem rather than an ontological one, by which I mean we're talking about how we might sort of come to know moral truths if we can constantly keep questioning our assumptions. We could say that, like, okay, we can't say that anything is true, and that's the problem of universal skepticism, that you can't really ground an epistemological worldview without pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. But I could say that the way I phrased it earlier, me saying that murder is wrong is as true or sort of as objective as the fact that the Earth orbits the sun. Maybe both of them are ultimately sort of like based on totally unknowable intuitions. But in the same way that you're willing to just say in the context of general epistemology, yeah, okay, technically, sure, but come on, man, the Earth obviously orbits the sun and that's objectively true. Why aren't we willing to do the same thing in the ethical framework of saying, oh, yeah, okay, technically it's based on an intuition that you can't prove, but come on, man, obviously torturing babies for fun is objectively wrong?
Yeah, I guess it... I'm trying to think if I have like a psychological hump that I just can't get over. Because the first thing I want to say is that, like, we have sense data to resolve, because we're looping now. We have sense data to resolve the thing about the Earth being round or not.
Yep.
But then I think you want to say, okay, well, we kind of have sense data in a way. We can sense like moral intuitions of something being right or wrong.
No, not quite. What I mean to say is that, like, the sort of Earth orbiting the sun thing is based upon... The intuition is not that the Earth orbits the sun. The intuition is that your sense data is accurate.
Yeah.
That's the intuition, right? That you just have absolutely no evidence for or against.
I guess I feel like the difference in the two propositions between like the ethical one and the Earth orbiting the physical one, I guess, is that like this is what it feels like to me. There's a room, and behind the door, I have really no idea what's behind the door. And then two people come up, and one guy's like, I think that I heard a little bit of noise. I think there might be like a person behind the door. And then the other guy's like, okay, well, I think there might be a beluga whale behind the door. And I would look at the guy that says there's a whale behind the door, and it's like, probably not. And then he'd say, well, if you think there could be a person behind the door, why not a whale? And it's like, well, I feel like I have a lot more reasons to believe in the person behind the door than the whale, although I guess theoretically the whale could be there. I guess I feel the same way when we talk about the understanding these physical and ethical statements. Like physically, I feel like we have so many more reasons to believe there's like universally shared consensus around these kind of like basic logical truths.
Is there?
They're testable in so many different ways with multiple sense data that all coincide with each other. And we can harshly resolve disagreements and almost resolutely say right or wrong, unless you want to be like ultimately skeptical of your own existence about disagreements here. But when it comes to these ethical statements,
that's it, isn't it? As long as you don't have that fundamental disagreement. Like the same thing with the whale and the human behind the door. You're absolutely right that these disagreements can be clinically solved so long as there is a fundamental agreement on something. And in the case of like the whale and the human, the agreement is something like we live in a world that obeys physical laws. You know, that sort of the world that we observe is real and will resemble the one that's behind the door. You know, so it's unlikely that the whale's going to be there. Absolutely, you can resolve that easily. Similarly, in a moral case, if you just grant some kind of assumption, we live in a moral universe where there are moral properties like goodness and badness, and suffering is bad and pleasure is good, then when it comes to moral disagreements, yeah, you can clinically solve those problems too. But what you're going to want to say as a moral anti-realist is like, well, yeah, of course you can solve these moral problems if you assume some moral baseline, but what's the justification for the moral baseline? And I'm saying, sure, you can easily solve, like, is it more likely to be a human or a whale behind the door if you assume that we live in a physical world that obeys laws that resemble.
But it relies on a common assumption.
Sure,
that's
but
interesting.
what's your justification for believing that? See what I mean? It's like the same question can be asked.
Yeah, like, so that's actually a really good point. Interesting. Okay, let's continue. But I like that idea of a common assumption. And that kind of ties into a little bit of what I think Adam was saying in the chats, where it's like, as long as there's a moral, like one moral that is universal and set and like is an absolute, then like from there you can determine quite a lot.
And I feel like what you're doing is when you say that descriptive disagreements can be resolved really easily, you're smuggling in agreement upon some fundamental principle that's not justified.
Yeah,
and you're not willing to do the same thing.
Yeah, then I'm essentially holding a higher standard for the ethical propositions than like the physical ones or whatever. And I kind of understand what you're saying there. I guess the only thing is that like, and maybe that's just the limitation of my mind. Like I could fathom that one day we'll figure out like what is dark matter, or we'll figure out the question of some really challenging thing in physics. I can't even imagine. It almost feels like a God question, like imagining something impossible. I can't imagine ever knowing the fact of the matter of is abortion right or wrong, like that. It just feels like something that is just so out of reach, like almost asking, like, imagine what it was like to be before you were born. And it's like, my subjective, I can't do that. I can't imagine what it's like to not be. I can't be and not be at the same time, right? Yeah. And that's what it feels like for like the moral questions. It's just like, I don't even know what direction I would even begin to step in. And it's so fundamentally different than anything else. Yeah, go ahead.
Because you've sort of compared like understanding what dark matter is to like fundamental moral truth. It's more like saying, well, yeah, I can't imagine a world in which we sort of suddenly just uncover like the truth about moral intuition. We suddenly are just able to prove that pleasure is good or something. But I also can't imagine a world in which we're able to actually scientifically prove that the external world exists, that we're not living in a simulation. I can't believe in a world in which we are suddenly able to prove that induction is true. Like I can't see that either.
Well, that is true. The difference.
Yeah, Adam was saying destiny is equivocating between universally agreed upon by humans versus epistemologically true regardless of human option. Moral statements can be objectively true whether or not they are agreed upon. Well, that's the thing. I don't think he believes that. I don't think he believes in the idea of or objective morality. I think he believes in subjective morality. And so that's the thing. I don't feel like he's equivocating. I feel like he's trying to justify non-objective morality, and that's a hard thing to justify. I feel like he's pretty consistent with that, but again, inevitably it creates problems because he's already bit the bullet that basically like might makes right according to his belief system, like that, you know, whoever's got the biggest army kind of dictates whatever the morality is, and that then becomes what is moral. which is very morally subjective. So I feel like he hasn't been super inconsistent or equivocating. I think the thing he's trying to do is kind of make it sound a little better. And maybe this is a little bit of equivocation where he's talking about, well, I mean, we all kind of agree on these good things, and just bypassing the fact that, like, earlier in the conversation, he basically admitted if we all agreed on really bad things, then those things would no longer be bad, they'd be good, which is a really tough position to hold. But again, I'll give him credit for owning it.
Is maybe there's a difference. You can talk on this. I don't feel like there are any real fundamental disagreements on the presuppositions needed to build out like physics and chemistry. Like nobody's out here seriously saying, I don't believe in non-contradiction, or I don't believe that like we can measure anything in a laboratory. Whereas for the fundamental, the stuff that you need to get morality off the ground, there are massive disagreements. I believe I am only granted things through special revelation. God tells me what's right or wrong, and then someone else might say like, actually through reason, every human perfectly reasonable can come to the same moral truth. And there's like, in physics, I don't see these like fundamental presupposed statements even existing. We all generally come from the same place, I'm pretty sure. But in ethics, how do you resolve people that are coming from fundamentally completely different places? Like these axiomatic statements, how do you ever figure out like who's right or wrong there?
Well, for a start, I think there are people who do quarrel with the fundamental axiological assumptions of science.
Yeah, fair
Generally,
point.
the scientific community just looks at them with skepticism and amusement and sort of excludes them from the process. But this is kind of like what happens when there are people who are skeptical of the basic moral intuitions that most people share, but what happens then is that the moral community looks upon them with skepticism and amusement and essentially excludes them. This is kind of like what you were talking about earlier. You sort of see someone who has a fundamental value conflict and you say, well, mate, you're just not part of our moral community. We're going to throw you in jail. We're going to kill you if we need to. You're just not a part of this. And we almost like sort of laugh at the absurdity of the things that they believe. Similar things can happen in a scientific community. It's just because you're unlikely to need to kill somebody or imprison them for this reason. You might have a similar situation in which you have, those wackos who make those crazy hippie videos about how like nothing exists, man, and science is false and all this kind of stuff. Like there are people who believe that. We just think that they're a minority, and that intuition is otherwise so widely shared that we essentially just ignore it and don't seriously accept the challenge that they're posing to us, which is justify your basic intuitions about your worldview.
Yeah, but like
I think the same thing's happening in both cases.
But for science, like if you progress to a certain point, at some point, like a paradigm shift will happen, right? Like there are people that'll say like, well, we're past Newtonian physics. We've moved on from that because empirically and we've validated so much stuff that now we've moved on to the next paradigm. Even if the people that disagreed with it were in a minority initially, eventually they can argue for those positions. But my understanding today, like is Kant any more popular now than he was hundreds of years ago? Or, how many people are still religious and believe in, morality coming from the Bible or the Quran or the Torah? How many it seems like for as many years as exists, there's more moral philosophers. Like how much closer are we to convening on like any type of like moral truth? Yeah, go ahead.
You said yourself a moment ago that there are certain very basic moral assumptions. I mean, in your own words, you said that, people might disagree about like LGBT or this kind of thing, but the really basic stuff, don't kill people for fun. That's everybody basically agrees with that all throughout history. Like there just has been a convergence. I think that the majority of moral history, if you look at what moral philosophers are doing, in many cases, they're just sort of trying to justify intuitions, or they're trying to explain morality, or they're trying to get to grips with what it is and definitions and meta ethics. But there isn't as much dispute about the kinds of things that are right and wrong fundamentally. Maybe. I mean, of course, that does exist.
Cosmic skeptics making a really good point here.
Also,
Adam further said, Destiny is not providing a counter argument against objective morality, though, when he gives examples of humans disagreeing. Agreed. Yeah. It doesn't matter. Like Cosmic Skeptic just said, there are actually people who totally disagree with like basic fundamentals of science. And the only thing that happens is people just kind of disregard it and think they're idiots. That's it. But it doesn't mean they don't exist. And their existence doesn't thus negate the truth of the matter of like what the majority are conferring upon. Right. Yeah, that's a fair point.
Sort of we can say, we had Newtonian physics, now we have, Einstein or whatever the trajectory is. But there's a sort of more fundamental assumption that's needed for the scientific method, which is that, Newtonian physics worked yesterday and it works right now. If I drop this object, it's going to fall to the ground. You just assume that that's still going to be the case in 20 seconds. I assume that like I'm not just going to start floating and fly into the ceiling or something like that. And the point is, I have no way to justify that intuition, or I have no way to justify that belief except intuition. People will want to say, by the way, who are listening to this, well, can't we say that because it's always for all of history things have fallen to the ground? Doesn't that give us reason to think they'll continue falling to the ground? Technically, no, and I don't really have time to get into that now. But that's the problem of induction, and if you want to know why that's the case, look into the problem of induction. It's fascinating and hugely problematic. But yeah, like sure, you have scientific progress, but you've got absolutely nowhere closer to guaranteeing that the laws of physics aren't going to change tomorrow. You've got absolutely nowhere closer to proving that the external world exists, or that other minds exist, or the very things that the entire scientific project is based upon. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I think that now I'm going to appeal to the satisfying or unsatisfying thing. I feel like that's a emotionally not compelling argument that like, well, sure, like maybe, we haven't figured out what is a moral fact yet, and you feel like we made scientific progress, but tomorrow all the laws of physics might change. It's like, okay, maybe, but that doesn't feel like a very compelling, this might happen, I guess, type of statement.
And it kind of doesn't feel that compelling that, well, maybe the Holocaust was just fine.
Yeah.
People want to say like, yeah, I guess I can't like prove that the Holocaust was wrong because I'm a moral anti-realist. But
I would argue that I think you could justify that. And here's how I would do it. And I'm not trying to bring up any of your drama, or I don't know if you are comfortable talking about vegan things at all, but I think that it is totally possible that in 50 to 100 years, especially depending on the progress we make of lab-grown meat, people might look back and go, Holocaust, I don't even know what that was. I'm thinking about the hundreds of millions of animals that were tortured and murdered on a daily basis. And, the amount of people killed in any war for humans pales in comparison to that. But today, we are fully on board with, like, eating and doing whatever with animals. And so, like, in the same way that we might say, like, I couldn't even imagine thinking the Holocaust wasn't an okay thing. That was clearly wrong. It's like, well, theoretically, 100 years from now, people might say the same about meat and eat, but you have no feeling about that right now,
Meat and eat, I think you meant eat meat. Still,
yeah, I think I actually agree with you on that point that people are more capable than they think. I guess I'm appealing to an intuition here of saying like people are going to hear you say, because what was it you said a second ago when you were like, I'm going to appeal to the emotional thing now? You were like, this is not emotionally satisfying.
Yeah, it doesn't feel satisfying to say like, well, couldn't all of science change tomorrow? Therefore, right? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And in the same way that I could just say the same thing to you, which is like, yeah, I understand why people would think that. But I'm willing to say that people are just actually underestimating their own sort of ability to think certain things, right? In the same way that we might say, well, people are going to think, oh, I could never see the Holocaust as right, but maybe they actually could if they were born in like 1930s Germany and they were raised in the right environment. Actually, they would see it that way. Sure. But look, I also sort of I don't want to potentially run in circles or go too much back and forth on these issues. It's been fascinating.
That's why meta ethics sucks, Fuck it all.
Yeah, I had another quote from you actually, which I didn't quite get to bring up yet, which is somebody said on that stream that you did, they said to you, morality is more complicated than internal happiness, to which you said, quote, I disagree. I will wholly argue and stay mad. All of meta ethics is fucking trash. Garbage, waste of time. It's philosophers that are bored as fuck circle jerking against other philosophers that are bored as fuck. All of us have things in life that we want. We try to satisfy those wants. That's all morality is, okay? So everybody who disagrees, suck a dick. I wonder if some of the conversational tones that we've been playing today could maybe persuade some people that it's not quite as dire as you make it out to be, because we have essentially been doing meta ethics here.
Yeah, I know. But then my counter argument to that would be, which by the way, I like wasting my time talking about crazy shit. It's fun for me. Or I shouldn't say waste my time. That's mean. This has been a fun conversation. I enjoy it. But sometimes I feel like we can spend so much time at a meta level. It's like, did we get any closer to having an opinion on like, should we have socialized healthcare or not? How should we deal with homeless people in the United States? What's like the correct way to deal with a parent that was abusive in our early years? That like on the applied level, there are so many fascinating questions. On the normative level, I think there's a lot of interesting questions.
That was a lot of moral terms you just used there for an anti-realist.
Yeah, well, listen.
Okay, guys.
That's the correct thing to do.
So we're going to pause it right now. If you want to see more of this, I'd recommend checking it out on the channel. I think it was very interesting. it's an interesting conversation. It's a hard one to justify. I don't envy any anti-realist like justifying morality or ethics, because I think that's the biggest weakness in that kind of framework of perception, and especially optically, it's just not like the most appealing thing, because I do kind of agree with the idea personally that I think we do have moral foundations that are kind of written into us, whether we like them or not. And this is why we have to justify like bad behavior when we commit it cross-culturally. And I actually think that there is like absolute truth when it comes to morality. Now, we may not know the absolute truth of it, but I think there is an absolute that we can strive to know better and gear our societies towards. And that's an easier ethical framework to kind of argue ethics from. But again, like there's weaknesses in that on other realms than just the ethical. That are really hard to defend and argue. It was an interesting conversation to pay attention to. I got a lot done in my comics. I appreciate those of you who chimed in and hung out, and really fun, lively conversations in the chats, particularly regarding the truth of chocolate chip ice cream being best and other such facts, like chocolate and peanut butter being the best mix. Anyhow, so we're gonna probably continue this at another time, but I'm going to go ahead and call it for the stream and get some rest, because I did get quite a lot done on my comics, and I hope you guys did too. Thomas Adams said, I think you can argue that morality must exist because civilization exists. Agreed. There's a really interesting C.S. Lewis argument about morality and the existence of it and our non-obedience to morality being observable through nature. That would be fun to walk through. Maybe there's a talk. I know some of C.S. Lewis's talks are on there. And Thomas Adams said heresy in regards to, I think, my ice cream truth. You can't fight the absolute truth of the best flavors of ice cream. Adam Lore said, have a good one, Josh. Have a good one, Adam. Thanks to everybody who chimed in, hung out in the chats. Make sure you check out everybody's artwork. If you haven't yet, hit like, hit subscribe, and hit that bell so you get notifications when I'm about to go live. I will be live streaming quite a bit tomorrow, I believe. And so if you guys haven't yet, make sure you've hit that bell so you get notifications. And also make sure you check out all the artists in the chats. We have a really good, solid community of artists, and it's pretty fun. All right. I will see you guys on the next live stream. Appreciate you guys. Take it easy, and I'll see you tomorrow.